Chapter 1, the year 2007. The New York City skyline was once again dancing with lights. The sounds of the city were very much a lullaby for those who lived within it. But on this day, many streets were backed up due to a traffic accident. A taxi had been hit by a large dump truck. Accidents were a normal scene in New York, but what was not so normal was the young woman and the man, named Jill and David Campbell, in the back seat of the car. "Honey, hang in there." David, with blood dripping from his head, covered in wounds, not caring for his own well-being, grasped Jill's hand, who had been sitting next to him. His eyes filled with tears as he gently stroked her face with great difficulty. He was still wearing the pajamas he had on before rushing out of the house. But now those were in tatters from the glass and metal that had cut into his body. Jill was in no better condition. She had a sharp piece of metal sticking through her chest. She wore a pale pink one-piece dress that was a bit too big for her, but it allowed her swollen stomach to be covered. They had been on the way to the hospital. Jill's water had broken, and her baby, whom she had been waiting 9 months for, was soon to be born. Both David and Jill were just newly married, and had returned from their honeymoon in preparation for the birth of their first child, a child they had been looking forward to. The sound of sirens rang through the air as the fire trucks finally reached the scene. They had trouble pushing through the rows of cars that were stuck in traffic, but with great difficulty they had finally arrived. Ricky Harris, the on-board paramedic, climbed down from his truck with his medical kit strapped to his shoulder and hurried over to the taxi that had half of one side crushed in and was upside down in the road. He looked at the mangled mess of steel and fiberglass with a furrowed brow. The scene before him was not a pretty sight, but he still pulled himself together and rushed over to the car. The smell of gas filled his nose, which meant that the gas tank had been ruptured. "We need to hurry." With a gloomy expression, he looked into the car to see the taxi driver did not seem to be conscious. He shook his head and looked in the back to see a man and woman huddled together in bad shape. Especially the female who had a long piece of metal stuck in her chest. "You too. Can you hear me? Is someone there? My wife. My wife is pregnant. Her water broke. Save our child. Save my wife." The man, who was still half awake, cried out the best he could. But even just yelling these words was not an easy thing for him to do. He could only grip his wife's hand tightly as he watched her breathing grow more shallow by the second. He was afraid. He was afraid of losing both his love and the child they were going to bear. But in this situation, he knew that his wife would ask for the child to be saved first. But he still held hope that both could be saved. "Hold on, I will do what I can." Ricky rushed over to the side where the mother was and waved to his fellow crew members. His colleagues hurried over with the right tools, and soon the window was pried out. With a lot of effort, Ricky and the rest of his crew were able to get the young woman out of the car. The man still had to wait to be pulled out. He had been pinned in the collision. With one look, you could easily tell he had thrown himself on top of his wife, trying to protect her. But at this time, the pregnant woman was Ricky's top priority. With the help of one of the other firefighters and a few volunteers, he was able to pull the young woman out, place her on a stretcher, and bring her near the fire truck. He could see that her vitals were not good. He took out his stethoscope and pressed it against her belly. He saw a lot of blood in her lower half, so he was afraid that maybe she had already had a miscarriage. At that moment, a loud explosion was heard, which drew Ricky's attention. He looked over to see some of his crew lying on the ground. The gas that had been leaking out had caught on fire and exploded. Now the entire rear of the vehicle was engulfed in flames. He did his best to keep his calm as a pained expression formed on his face. He was lucky he had been far enough away not to be caught in the blast. He could only take a deep breath and check the mother-to-be's vitals once more. There were no signs of life anymore. Damn it! He cursed out loud before checking for signs of life in the unborn child. Only when he heard a faint beat did he feel that maybe there was some hope. Good, there is a chance. He let out a small, relieved sigh. As long as he could save the child. 14 years later, in a 2-bedroom apartment within the Gilroy Tower at 232 East 54th Street, a young girl was frantically rummaging through her desk drawer. When she could not find what she was looking for, she slapped her hands on top of her desk and turned her head towards the door. Dad, I can't find my scrunchie with the blue dragon pattern on it. A young girl called out from her room. The man in the living room, trying to finish cooking breakfast, sighed and put the spatula in his hand down. He wiped his hands on his black apron and lowered the heat of the stove. Dad? The young girl's voice once more rang out, causing the man to look down at the coffee table and sigh. He reached down and picked up the black scrunchie that had a blue scaled dragon embroidered into it and walked down the hall towards the door that was slightly ajar. Desiree, you left it in the living room last night. The man named Ricky Harris announced as he knocked on the door. It was just the two of them. It had been this way for 14 years now, ever since that fateful day when they entered each other's lives. Back then, all the adults in the car had died. Ricky had only managed to save one person from that car. The driver and the father died due to their injuries and the flames. The mother passed in front of his eyes. But the baby that resided inside her stomach was saved due to him doing a C-section right there on the spot. He had no choice. If he did not do it, the baby inside would have died. Luckily, things went well, and the little girl came out crying. The little girl's tale did not end there. She was checked into the hospital, and when found to be perfectly healthy, 2 weeks later, she was placed into an orphanage. She had family, but they all refused to take her in for one reason or another. They all gave different reasons, such as they couldn't afford it, or they already had too many kids. Not one of them seemed to care about the little girl who had been given a chance at life after losing both her parents, because his boss had found out about it, and since Ricky was the one who had saved the girl, his boss had explained the situation to him. Ricky could not see the little girl rotting away inside an orphanage. He knew they were underfunded, and most of the kids would go unnoticed there and end up being without anything when they reached 18. People talk. He had heard many stories when he looked into the place she was put into. Since that was the case, he made a decision that would change his life forever. After almost a month of paperwork and background checks, Ricky had gotten custody of the little girl. Life with a baby was not easy. Luckily, he had a supportive family. They helped him with everything he needed when he was at work and taught him how to raise a child. And now, 14 years later, the young girl who was pursing her lips looking at him was 14 years of age. Her name, Desiree Campbell Harris. Her last name had been Campbell to start, due to Ricky wanting to give her the choice later on what she wanted to do. But in the end, she decided to change it when she grew and understood things. Desiree knew Ricky was not related to her by blood. She had learned everything when she was 10 years of age. But she did not need to be blood related to see him as her father. He was a man that raised her from young and took her in. He spoiled her and gave her a family which she might not have had. Her silver blonde hair that she had gotten from her mother and her ice blue eyes that she had gotten from her father, none of it looked like Ricky at all, except for two things, her personality and the things she likes, which she picked up from her father that cared for her all these years. Of course, she also had her own likes and dislikes as well. But one thing stood out the most out of everything: her love for dragons. You would think a young girl her age would be giggling about some hot boy from a boy band group, but this was not the case for Desiree. She loved dragons. She did not even try to hide it. If someone said she was strange or tried to pick on her, she would put them in their place. This was not a new obsession either. No, she had liked them since she was very young, and even after all this time, this fact had never changed. And this was all thanks to Ricky, who had brought home a blue crystal dragon he found in a store. He had thought it looked nice and was planning to turn it into a nightlight for Desiree. She had just recently watched a movie about dragons at the time and seemed to like them, so he had gotten this one, which was a cute-looking blue dragon. But before he could even do anything with it, she had snatched it away and brought it to her room. Since then, little by little, he would buy her more things with blue dragons. He had once tried to change the color to give it variety, but Desiree ended up crying and calling it ugly. In order to appease her at that time, he had no choice but to take her down to the store and find a blue one. But all of this was fond memories for Ricky. He had never regretted adopting Desiree. He couldn't even imagine a life without her. Ricky smiled as he handed the scrunchie over. Breakfast is almost ready, so hurry up. Okay. Desiree smiled as she held the scrunchie in her hand. She went to turn but stopped before turning around and looking out the door at her father's retreating back. Dad. Thank you. You're welcome. Ricky smiled as he thought about how well she had grown. He hoped in the future she would go to college, learn what she wanted to learn, and live a life of happiness. Maybe one day he would be holding his grandbaby in his arms. He did not know what the future held, but until the time she struck out on her own, no, even after she struck out on her own, he would support her in everything she did. Bye, Dad. Ricky watched as his daughter walked out the door and off to school. Watching his daughter growing up so quickly left him with a bit of melancholy, but he was happy she was able to grow up healthy and happy. He fell into thought for a moment when he remembered something. Desiree, I am working late today, so make sure you come right home. Got it? Desiree turned and backpedaled as she blew Ricky a kiss, then turned back around. She got into the elevator and pressed the button for the bottom floor. She reached up and touched her scrunchie and smiled. She felt blessed to have Ricky as a father. She never felt sad with him around. But she did wonder if he was holding himself back, since he had never brought a woman home. She hoped that he would one day get married and find happiness. She also would not mind having a mother. She looked up at the numbers that were slowly changing with each floor until it came to a stop on the 20th floor. The door opened, and a young girl around Desiree's age got on. She had the same clothing as Desiree did. A plaid skirt and a blue blazer marked with the Trinity School logo. She had a blue tie that was slightly loosened around the collar of a white shirt. Her red hair fell down to the middle of her back and was slightly curly. When she saw Desiree, her eyes lit up as she hopped over to her and gave her a hug. Deza, I missed you. Becky, I think you need to stop staying up so late. Your mind is rotting away. We were playing World of Logia until late last night, so how can you miss me as if we have not talked to each other for a long time? Desiree asked. She went to a private school that had its own bus that picked them up in front of their building. She did not go to public schools, and she was glad for that since her school was a school for smart kids. Her grades have always been good since she was young. She had never had issues learning anything in school. Because of this, she knew her father wanted her to get the most out of her education and got her into a super expensive private school. The Trinity School was located on the Upper West Side of New York City and was about 17 or so minutes from her house. This and that are different. Anyway, did you finish your homework? No, I know you did. Can I see it on the bus? Becky was pleading. She had not finished her homework because she got caught up in playing games before Desiree even logged on. World of Loja was a game that Desiree had been playing in her free time for only one reason. They had a dragon race. That race was a humanoid dragon, but it allowed you to design the character how you wanted. And since Desiree had a love of blue-scale dragons, she made a character that looked kind of like her with silver blonde hair and ice blue eyes. Her exposed scales on her body and tail were blue, along with her horns that was almost a transparent blue. You could say she was very happy with her work. She would need to be after spending almost a week on designing her character alone. And the reason she even found out about this game was because of Becky. Becky was a gamer through and through. Her favorite genres were role-playing games and MMOs. From one look at her beauty, you would never take her as a gamer. She had green emerald eyes and freckles on her pearly white cheeks. She was popular with the boys at school and was also one not to hide her hobby in the slightest. But in the school they went to, there was not much bullying to begin with. Desiree never realized it, but she was also quite popular, but she had high standards when it came to men. Of course, this was mainly because she was rating all the boys around her against her father, whom she deemed the perfect man. Desiree looked at her friend and sighed as she reluctantly nodded her head. Becky, you need to get your priorities in order. I go straight home every day so I can get the homework done and then do what I want after. But I try. When I get home, I put my books down on my desk, take off my blazer, and then sit down in front of my desk. I open my math book, and then the game across the room calls out to me and asks me to save some strange land from the Demon King. And well, they always tell us to help those in need, so I do. Most would say that Becky was just making up some strange story to justify her actions, but she herself believes her own words, so in truth, she was not lying. She truly believes the games called out to her, and as her friend, Desiree could only sigh. Okay, well, maybe you should do your homework someplace else then. You can always come to my house if you wish. No. If I went to your house, I would end up not doing anything and distracting you. Becky was quite sure about this. Even Desiree had to nod her head at this. The elevator reached the bottom floor, and the two exited and walked towards the exit. They said good morning to the attendant behind the counter and walked across the marble floor of the entrance. Once they reached the sidewalk, they took a right and walked toward the bus stop that was only a few feet away. The morning traffic slowly progressed forward, as it normally did. The smell of the city filled Desiree's nose, a familiar smell that she wished was just a bit cleaner. Right as Desiree passed the side alley next to her building that had air conditioners attached to the side and a few dumpsters here and there, she stopped and looked down it with a furrowed brow. Dessa? Becky looked over at Desiree with questioning eyes. She wondered why her friend stopped when the bus was right there. Desiree was staring down the alley. She could have sworn she saw something blue out of the corner of her eye, but no matter how hard she looked, she could not spot anything. Blue is a color she would always recognize, and would never mistake it for anything else. While she wanted to go investigate, she could not since the bus had just arrived. Shaking her head, she slapped her cheeks, wondering if she was slightly tired. It's nothing. As Desiree and Becky got on the bus, in the same alley she had just been looking down, a small, round, blue gelatin ball slowly edged out from behind a box with an Amazon logo. What this creature, if it could be called as such, was, at this time, only a few people would know. Down a dark blue bus, with the Trinity School logo on the side, drove off from the bus stop, with Desiree and Becky on it. Two girls sat in the rear seats where they normally sat. They were usually the first people on the bus, so they got first dibs on seating. Some may wonder why they sat in the back, and not the front or the middle seats. This was because Becky needed to copy homework almost every day. Now, this did not mean Becky was a dumb girl by any means. She was always in the top 5 of her grade during tests. She was just not someone who did her homework due to her gaming habit. When she copied Desiree's homework, it would always be much different than the original, and she sometimes would even find mistakes as well, and point them out to Desiree, which Desiree was always grateful for. The bus slowed to a stop, and more kids got onto the bus. Becky poked Desiree and whispered into her ear, "Jake is here. He is already coming this way." Jake Williams was one of the popular boys in school, and seemed to have a habit of trying to get close to Desiree. She did not like him as anything more than a friend since he was too stuck up for her liking, so she stealthily put her bag next to her in the open spot, so he could not sit right next to her. Jake smiled at Desiree's move, and sat in the seat just in front of her, looked back at her with that same beaming smile, and gave his usual greeting. "Good morning, Desiree. Did you think about the thing I asked you the other day?" Desiree rolled her eyes as she looked at the young boy, who was just 14 himself. His black hair was neatly trimmed, and his slightly tanned skin seemed to glow. One smile from him could make a lot of girls fall in love. Sadly, she had to admit he was indeed handsome, but I thought I already said no, right there on the spot without needing to think about it. "Jake, I will say this now. Go find another girl. I am not going to go out with you anytime soon. If I recall correctly, you have asked me out every year since middle school. One time I even punched you in the face. Another time I threw you over my shoulder when you tried to pull me back. There was also the time I kicked you between the legs. Shall I reenact all 3 of those moments for you now?" Jake squeezed his legs together, just thinking of what happened back then. The first time they met was in middle school. It was the first day Desiree had transferred in. Her silver blonde hair and her ice blue eyes had put him in a daze when he first saw her. He was even teased by his friends because he couldn't stop staring at her. Because he was younger, he was also much more impulsive and did not understand the meaning of space, especially when it came to being between a male and a female. It happened on their first meeting. Desiree had just walked into the door of her classroom on her first day of school. Her silver blonde hair at the time was slightly shorter. She was very nervous as she came to stand in front of the class to introduce herself. "My name is Desiree Harris. Miss Harris, please take a seat next to Becky and Jake." The teacher, who was pregnant at the time, motioned for Desiree to sit down. The classroom had a low student-teacher ratio, and the seating was in a half-moon shape. This meant unless you sat at the ends, you had a person on either side of you. While the desks were still separated, it was still close enough that one could reach over and touch the other with no problem. While this was Jake and Desiree's first meeting, it was not Becky and Desiree's first meeting. They had been friends since they were young, since they had lived in the same building. It was because of Becky's parents that Desiree was able to enter the school, due to a recommendation, and even got a bit of a break on the tuition. This was because Becky's parents knew the school's dean. As for Jake, the first incident between him and Desiree happened as soon as she sat down. She had just put her blue backpack on the back of her chair, and sat in her seat, when a hand suddenly grabbed hers. Ricky had Desiree take self-defense classes since she was young, which she still attended to this day, so when she was suddenly grabbed, she turned and Ow! Jake held his nose as blood squirted out. He had been hit right on the tip of his nose. "Don't touch me," Desiree yelled out. Becky, who was sitting next to her, panicked and quickly pulled Desiree back before she threw another punch. The teacher, who had just sat down and was about to start class, looked at the scene with eyes filled with disbelief. "What is going on?" the teacher cried out as she stood up again. "Teacher, Jake tried to grab Desiree, and she hit him in self-defense," Becky quickly explained. No matter what, she would protect her best friend. "Jake, did you try to touch a girl?" The teacher, being female, immediately turned against the poor young man who had just been punched in the face. His eyes were watering up as he tried to stop the bleeding, but he still answered in a pained voice. "You can't touch people without permission. Come on, I will take you to the nurse." The teacher sighed as she looked at the class. "Take out your math books and study page 12. I will test you when I get back." Thus their first meeting was met with Jake going to the nurse's office and then to the hospital to have his nose put back in place. Desiree had given it a good clean break. The second and third time was not much different. He was thrown over Desiree's shoulder a month later when he tried to get her attention by grabbing her hand and pulling her back. The third time he had tried to come on a little too strong after watching a show that had a man pin a girl against the wall, which ended up getting him sent to the nurse's office once more. Since the last time, though, he did not try to do anything to make Desiree mad. But he still tried to get on her good side and confessed to her at least once or twice a year. Desiree found each incident good practice for her self-defense abilities. She was able to apply them to real-world situations, which worked out well for her. How good she would be in a real fight was another question altogether. "Why are you not answering?" Desiree asked with a raised eyebrow. She had to admit she did find Jake amusing. "Guess I think that is enough. He might cry again." Becky chimed in, which got an instant reaction from Jake. "I will not cry," Jake yelled out, his face growing red. But it was a fact that each time Desiree beat him up, he did cry. "All right, I will leave you alone. But I will say this one more time. The answer is no," Desiree stated firmly. She really did not want anything to do with Jake beyond friendship. She knew Jake was handsome and had been chasing her since middle school, but she could not see herself with anyone her age at this time. She just wanted to live her current life without love, as it would just make things messy. She wanted to graduate and get into a good college in 4 years' time. Then and only then would she even think of love. "Hey, why is the bus not moving?" Becky suddenly cut in. This made Desiree look up toward the driver's seat. She had not noticed until now, but the bus had not moved since picking Jake and the others up. "Sorry, kids, there seems to be some kind of traffic jam. I am not sure what is going on," the bus driver explained. He had been trying to get back into traffic, but no one was moving. Desiree's thought went back to the blue object she had spotted in the back alley. But she quickly shook her head to clear her mind. She grabbed her bag and stood up. "Let's go. With how traffic is, we will probably make it there faster if we walk. I hate to say it, but you are right. I will call the school to have the kids walk." "Sorry about this." The bus driver, who was a 60-year-old old man, let out a sigh. He felt bad for making the kids walk to school, but at this rate, they will end up being late no matter what. Luckily, the area was a high-end area where crime was less likely to happen. "Wait. I haven't finished copying the homework," Becky cried out, But seeing Desiree starting to get her things together, she had no choice but to follow along. When we get close to the school, we can stop so you can finish up. Either way, we will end up being late as things are now, so a few more minutes won't hurt. Desiree did not wish to leave Becky in a tight spot, so she did not mind being a little later than they were already going to be. That's my bestie, Dessa. Becky happily gathered her things and hugged Desiree's arm as the two girls alighted from the bus. The sounds of horns honking could be heard echoing through the streets. Even some people were sticking their heads out of their car windows and yelling at the person in front of them to move, as if they could do anything. I wonder what happened. Becky pursed her lips. She hung on to Desiree's arm, which was normal for her when they were walking around the school. Desiree was also used to this as well, since Becky had always had this habit of clinging to her since they were young. I am not sure, Desiree answered as she looked down the road. She also wished to know what was going on. Girls, look. Jake held his phone up, which caused Desiree and Becky to stop, along with a few of the other kids who had gotten on the bus. They all gathered around to watch a live video of what was happening down the street. Chapter 2. On the screen, a young woman with light brown hair that was tied up into a bun stood in front of the camera with a News 7 microphone. Wearing a green business skirt, she stood out compared to the gray backdrop around her. Behind her were 3 cars all smashed together in a mangled mess. But the strange thing was that the cops and rescue workers were standing around seemingly in a confused state. For those of you joining in, there was an accident on the corner of East 53rd St. and Park Ave. What seems like a self-driven car accident at first glance is actually not. From what I have been told, there were 2 cars and a delivery truck involved in the accident, 2 of which did not have a driver. The driver of the delivery truck smashed into both cars as the cars sped through the red light at the same time. What is still to be determined is what happened to both drivers of the 2 cars. Both cars were gas-powered cars and not electric or self-driven. There were no witnesses to anyone getting out of either vehicle either, so the cause of the accident is still unknown at this time. This is News 7. Back to you, Chuck. The reporter ended her live coverage without really telling much of anything. So what? We got ghost cars now? She really did not explain things well. Jake swiped his screen and closed the app on his phone. He was a little confused as to what he was just told. I think the entire thing is just a mystery, which is why no one is able to really understand what is going on. I think the reporter was just as confused as we are now, which is why the report was not really able to explain things. Anyway, we should get moving. Desiree saw no point in even worrying about it, as it was just another incident in many that happen in New York. With all the crime the city had, it was surprising they even sent a news crew out to a small accident. It was not really something those news stations would normally cover. Desiree and her group, which consisted of Becky, Jake, and 2 others, began making their way to school. She was slightly chubby with black hair and eyes, but she had a smile that made others smile with her. She was a very cheerful girl, which allowed her to make friends easily. And the second was a young man with short brown hair and glasses that covered his hazel eyes. His name was Mike Lanes. While somewhat of an outcast, he was not hated by any means. He was just quiet and kept to himself. He was actually first in the grade, which, while somewhat gloomy, made him a secret crush for many of the girls. Well, not all the girls. Becky did not care about the opposite sex unless it was a cute animated guy in one of her games, and Desiree because she wanted nothing to do with love until college, or maybe even after that. She was actually not sure on this front, since she knew when you like someone, it just happens. She had seen enough movies and heard stories from others about this topic, so she was not blind to the idea of love. She just refused to deal with it at this time. This sucks, Becky complained as she leaned heavily onto Desiree, almost knocking her over. Becky, walk right. Desiree pinched Becky's side, causing the girl to yelp out. So mean. I am tired and have to walk, Becky complained as she rubbed her side with her free hand. You should sleep early then. I woke up at 6 this morning and got ready for school, and I went to bed at the same time as you unless you stayed up a few hours more. Well, I should say that I know you did. Desiree sighed. She wondered why Becky liked to do this to herself. Becky was trying to answer when a car suddenly barreled onto the sidewalk, smashing between two parked cars and crashing into the front of the building. Desiree had reacted in time and pulled Becky with her, jumping back and falling to the ground in the process. That was close. Are you two okay? Jake called out. Yeah, we are fine. You, Mike, what about you two? Desiree rubbed her elbow that had gotten scrapped up and looked left and right to see both of them on the ground, a few feet away. Mike was face down while Yu was on her back. From their position, it was easy to tell that Mike had tried to protect Yu. Blood, Becky cried out. Blood was slowly pooling on the ground from Mike, who seemed to have hit his head when trying to protect Yu. Jake, give me your undershirt and call 911. Desiree scrambled to her feet and hurried over to Mike. She looked him over to see he had only one injury on his forehead. She did not know if he had a concussion or not, so she did not dare move him too much. Her father, being a paramedic, was very helpful in situations like this. She quickly checked his pulse to make sure he was still alive before checking Yu's pulse as well. When she saw that they were both alive, she breathed out a sigh of relief. Ouch! Yu slowly came to and held her head. She looked to have bumped it as well, but not as badly as Mike did. Don't move. Just sit there until the ambulance comes. Mike saved you, so when he wakes up, make sure you thank him. Desiree took the white shirt that Jake handed over to her, and using her teeth, tore it into strips. She quickly wrapped the strips around Mike's head and kept his head elevated slightly with her knee. Desiree! There is no driver here, Jake yelled out. He still had the phone to his ear, seemingly still trying to get through to 911. That's all well and good, but what is going on with the ambulance? Desiree could care less whether there was a driver or not. Right now, she was more worried about Mike. I can't get through. It's just all circuits are busy recording. Jake seemed anxious. He kept calling the same number over and over, but nothing was getting through. Desiree bit the tip of her finger as she fell into thought for a moment before turning to Becky and calling out to her. Becky, get my phone from my bag and call my father. Huh? Right. On it! Becky was already panicking. Her entire body was shaking. Her hands fumbled around just to unzip Desiree's bag and rummaged through it to find her phone. After digging through the bag and almost dumping the contents out onto the ground, Becky finally found the cell phone that had made its way to the bottom of the bag. The screen was cracked due to the fall, but it still worked. She quickly unlocked the phone, which she knew the pin was Desiree's father's birthday, opened the contact and called the number with the word Dad next to it. But, sadly, all circuits are busy. Please try again later. Why is no one else coming? Becky's hands shook as she looked at Desiree in hopes she might have an answer. This is strange. It's like no one is around. Jake did not understand why no one was coming over to help or even inspect what was going on. When he looked around, he saw a few people who were running in the opposite direction. The fact that they were running made him even more confused. But he was starting to have a bad feeling. Deza, I think we need to leave. Huh? We can't. I leave Mike. Desiree was keeping Mike's head propped up on her knees, which were red from kneeling on the ground, and keeping her finger on his pulse. It was painful since rocks were pushing into her skin, but she was waiting for someone to come over and help out. At the same time, she was trying to calm down, but Jake was not helping. Then, take him with us. Everyone else is running from something. Jake yelled out. He kept seeing people passing by. They were completely ignoring what was happening. Cars lined the streets, but even those people who were stuck in traffic were getting out of their cars and running away. It was like a scene out of some kind of apocalyptic movie. Wah. Desiree finally took a look around to see people running down the street, in a hurry, screaming. She had not realized it until now, but something truly was going on. Guys, I think it's too late. Becky's trembling voice entered their ears. Desiree turned to look at her best friend to see her eyes wide with fear, her finger pointing towards the car that had crashed into the wall. Desiree turned her head to see something sitting on top of the car. A humanoid that was short with green skin and had pointed ears along with a large pointed noose with a sharp elongated chin. It licked its lips and smiled at Desiree, showing its black teeth and purple tongue while squinting its beady black eyes. She did not know what to do. She looked at her friends to see them all frozen in fear, and knew things were not good. Jake, take you and Becky and get the hell out of her. I will bring Mike. Right. Jake snapped out of it and quickly helped Yu to her feet before half dragging her to Becky and taking Becky's hand, pulling her along. Becky did not want to go as she tried to pull back from Jake, but he refused to let go. Becky cut it out. I can't leave Deza. Becky yelled out. But Jake still dragged her away. She turned to look at Desiree, her best friend since they were little, to see her smile at her before turning her attention to Mike. That smile, she knew well. It was her everything will be okay smile. That smile was enough for her to stop resisting and allow Jake to lead the way. She could only hope Desiree could escape too. Desiree gritted her teeth and stood up while pulling Mike up with her. She was happy that Mike was skinny. This made him light enough that even she could carry him. But as she stood up, creaky. Before Desiree could even take a step, she felt something heavy hit her back, causing her to cry out. Ah! A sharp pain jolted through her body as she stumbled forward. She lost her grip on Mike, dropping him to the ground. Sadly, things did not end there. She felt something pulling at her skirt, causing her to kick backward with her foot, landing it solidly on its target before swinging her body around to see the green humanoid tumble to the ground, trying to stand back up. Now that she could get a better view of what it was, her eyes widened in shock since she had seen such a creature before. A goblin. She hated to admit it, but she understood why it tugged on her skirt just now. Goblins are mythical creatures that normally show up in fantasy stories, movies, and TV. While sometimes they are depicted as a race of intelligent beings, they are more known for their savagery and their need to breed. With one look, she could tell this one was the latter. The goblin had a brown cloth wrapped around its waist, but there was a certain part sticking up that told Desiree that if she got caught, it would be very, very bad. She looked down at Mike, who was still unconscious. Blood was soaking through the bandage she had put on him. She had no idea if he was even still alive at this point. Right now, Although she wished she could get him out of here, she first had to deal with the situation at hand. She did not dare take her eyes off the goblin for too long as it slowly got up. She was racking her brain, trying to come up with some kind of plan to deal with this situation. I guess there is only one way to make sure we both live. It was risky. She had two options. First, she had a feeling that if she ran, the goblin would chase after her and leave Mike alone, but she was worried that if she did, another monster might come out of nowhere and attack him. Her eyes were already darting around while keeping the goblin in view, looking for a weapon of some kind. A glimmer of light caught her eye when she looked towards her bag. A pair of scissors had been dumped out when Becky had gone through it. Her eyes flashed. Just now she had barely kicked the goblin hard, yet it went flying back. This meant she could probably win in a fight if she were to use the scissors to kill it. Then she could escape with Mike. Option 2 is the only option. Taking a deep breath, Desiree rushed forward. Shh, Jake, are we just going to leave her? Becky, who had long been dragged around the corner and into an entryway, wanted to kick Jake back out since he was not being a man. Deza said she would come, so she will. She told me to keep you two safe, and that is what I am doing. For now, rest in here and hope nothing comes. Jake replied. He could not stop shaking. He had never seen a monster before. He couldn't help but be scared. So when Desiree told him to go, he did not hesitate. He wanted to leave as fast as he could. Even if he was told to return, he did not dare to. He knew he was being a wuss, but he couldn't help it. He was scared. Becky had tears streaming down her now red cheeks from being both mad and anxious at the same time. She snorted and kicked Jake in the shin, causing him to cry out in pain and crouch on the ground before opening the door. But before leaving, she turned and looked back at Jake with disdain. I am so glad Desiree never accepted your feelings. As a boy who always chased after her, you don't even have the balls to go back and try to help her. You do not deserve her, and never will. Becky left the entryway, slamming the door behind her, leaving behind a dumbfounded Jake. He held his shin and looked at the door that was now closed, blocking all view of the outside world with a blank expression. He could not say anything. He was afraid for his life. He tried to act tough, but no. A hand gently tapped his shoulder. He turned to see you looking at him. No matter what she said, you still took the two of us out of there, so I thank you since I could not have escaped on my own, but... You looked up at Jake with her big round eyes and continued. Becky was right. You don't deserve Desiree. She would have gone back for you if she was in your situation. I am not trying to denounce you. I myself am too scared to leave this place as well, but I would have thought you would have gone back for her. Jake sat there staring blankly at you, unable to say a word. There was no argument to be made. If he truly liked Desiree, he could have gone back for her, but to him, his life was much more important, which is why he could only watch as Becky left. On the outside, Becky had already made her way to the corner and stopped at the edge of the building. The streets were filled with abandoned cars. The sounds of people going about their daily business were replaced with the strange sounds of creatures she had never heard before. These sounds sent shivers down her spine, as if she was watching some kind of horror movie. The eerie silence that was only broken by the sounds was truly terrifying. Becky gulped a mouthful of saliva as she finally worked up the courage to peek around the corner. When she did, her eyes almost dropped out of her head at the scene before her. A few minutes earlier, Desiree ran over to the scissors right as the goblin charged at her once more. She dodged the goblin that had dived right at her, quickly picked up the scissors and spun her body around. This time she did not wait for the goblin to get up. Instead, she jumped forward, pinned the goblin to the ground, and stabbed the scissors in her hand into its neck over and over. Purple blood squirted into the air, splattering on her face and school uniform. But even while covered in blood, Desiree continued stabbing the goblin until it finally stopped moving. Her arms had been scratched by the goblin's claws and were now bleeding badly, but she did not care. She had killed the thing that had attacked them. She gasped for air as her adrenaline slowly stabilized. She had exerted herself way past the point of anything she had done before. She looked down at her arms, which were burning with pain, and clenched her teeth. She slowly stood up as blood dripped from her arms. Desiree had just gotten to her feet when a blue transparent window suddenly popped up in front of her, causing her to fall back on her butt and cry out in pain. She had no idea if the blue window in front of her was real or not. She stretched out her right hand, extending her index finger, and poked at the screen. Desiree quickly pulled her finger back. She felt as if it had been pricked by something. She looked at the tip of her finger to see a small bubble of blood. Her attention was only on her finger for a few seconds when she suddenly saw text appearing in the blue window. System initializing. System now undergoing DNA scan. Scanning, scanning. Scanning, scanning. Scanning complete. First stage evolution will now commence. Huh? Evolution? What? Desiree let out a blood-curdling scream of pain as she felt her entire body being ripped to shreds. Becky, who was still watching from the corner, was amazed by how her best friend killed the monster. But when she heard Desiree suddenly cry out in pain, she knew she could no longer just stand there watching. She did not even hesitate to run over to her side. Dessa! Becky stopped a few feet away from Desiree. Her friend since childhood was now writhing on the ground in pain. Her blood-covered arms had huge gashes in them that went down to the bone. But Becky somehow knew that Desiree's pain was not due to these wounds. It was something else that was causing her to kneel over and hug her body. Becky reached out with her hand and took a step forward while gently calling out to her best friend, Disa. Ah! Becky was launched backward as a surge of energy suddenly spread out from Desiree's body. She tumbled to the ground, scraping up her arms and legs as she skidded across the ground on her side. Although she was in pain, Becky was still more concerned about Desiree. She pushed herself up and looked in the direction her friend was in, but she could not see Desiree anywhere. All she saw was what looked like blue fog swirling around the spot that Desiree was last in. Wow! Yeah, what is going on? Desiree! Within the blue fog, Desiree was curled up in the fetal position. Her entire body felt as if it was being broken apart. Her muscles, her bones, and even her skin. It all seemed to be breaking down and reconstructing itself. Normally one would pass out due to shock, but Desiree was still wide awake. She could see her hands and arms starting to change. They were getting smaller and turning blue. She had no idea what was going on, but she felt as if the world around her was starting to change. She had no idea how much time had passed, but the pain in her body was starting to subside. She could now get a decent look at what was going on around her. In front of her was still the blue transparent screen, but more than that, there was a wall of blue fog encircling her. What the hell is wrong with my hands? Desiree looked down at her hands. No, these were not hands but claws. While the palms of her claws were a light blue color, the top part was covered in ice blue scales. She looked down at herself to see that even her body was no longer the same, and her line of sight had adjusted to be a bit wider. What's this? She noticed something new on the ground next to her. She reached out and poked it with her black claw out of curiosity. I can feel that. She hunched over to inspect it even closer, only to see it move slightly with her body movement. Is this a tail? Wait! If I can feel that, and it's a tail, then do I? Reaching up with her claws, Desiree touched the top of her head. She felt two small protrusions sticking out of it about 2 inches long. She was now sure she had turned into something incredible. Just as she was getting her bearings, the blue fog finally dissipated and finished entering her body. A dinging sound could be heard in her ears, causing her to look at the blue screen in front of her. Evolution complete. All systems online. Welcome to the World Order System Force. Opening status window. U World Order System name. Desiree Harris race. Ice Draggling age. 14 level. 1 monster rank. F evolution requirements. Reach level 20 and kill 3 rank E elites. HP 50-50 MP 10-10 skill points. 0 skills ice breath. 1 bite G white immunity. I knew it, Desiree yelled out as she jumped up into the air before slumping back down. I love dragons. I love ice dragons the most, but I wanted to be a dragon girl. Not a full-fledged dragon. No, wait. It says here I can evolve, so maybe? But, more importantly, I need to check on Mike, and then... How am I supposed to go back like this? Desiree? Is that you? A soft yet confused-sounding voice came from Desiree's side. She turned to see Becky slowly getting up off the ground, staring at her in shock, and with a bit of fear in her eyes. If I told you I was, would you believe me? Desiree lowered her head. Her shoulders and tail slumped slightly. She had no idea how to explain things since they all just happened. She herself was still trying to grasp her head around it. She had gone from a healthy 14-year-old girl to a monster. This was not normal, no matter how you looked at it. It was like something straight out of a fantasy story. Yet then again, so were goblins, and there was a dead one lying on the ground just a few feet away from her. One she had killed herself. Becky was highly confused. She could see Desiree's uniform spread out around the small figure in front of her. The figure had ice blue scales covering its entire body except for its underbelly, which was a light blue, and 2 transparent light blue horns on top of its head. And the voice alone was very much familiar, but... I have a mole somewhere on my body, and only you and my mother. Left butt cheek, just above the thigh, Desiree interrupted. She only knew this because they used to bathe together. Shh. Becky's cheeks blushed as she ran over and tried to cover the blue figure's mouth. But when she realized that it was not a human head, she slowly put her hands down and hugged the figure. Deza. Tears streamed down Becky's cheek. Her best friend had become a lizard. Deza, how did this happen? You became a lizard thing. I am not a lizard. I am a dragon. Desiree snorted as she pushed Becky away. She sighed and looked down at herself. I do not know. As soon as I killed the goblin, a blue screen popped up in front of me, spewing all kinds of things, and then I was overcome with pain. The next thing I knew, I was like this. I have no idea what is going on, but I now have a game HUD and even a status screen. This Becky was unsure how to take all of this, but she was slightly jealous if this was the case. Well, about everything except the pain part. Anyway, we can talk more. But first, we need to move. I don't know how, but I can sense quite a few things heading this way, and they are not human. I am too short to carry Mike now, so you will need to help pull him out of here. His chest is still going up and down slightly, so he is alive. I will get his feet. Just lead us to where Jake and you are. Okay? Becky nodded. She knew this was the right move. She walked over to Mike, knelt down, and put her arms under his armpits, then pulled him up. He was heavy for her, but it soon felt lighter when she saw Desiree lift his legs. If it gets too much, let me know. And if we get attacked, just drop him and run. I will deal with it. Desiree wanted to make sure Becky knew to run away as soon as possible if things went south. She could sense that there were many beings around them, but did not know their exact location or how far they were from her. She only knew that they needed to go into hiding for the time being and try to figure things out. She also needed to try to get in contact with her father. But she also did not know how to explain her current state to him. She let out a deep sigh as she mumbled, one step at a time. A few minutes later, heavy. She had all the weight on her side while Desiree was holding Mike's feet. But she knew with Desiree's current size, it would be hard for her to carry him without him dragging. Even now, his midsection was bumping off the ground. And this was with Desiree trying to hold his legs up over her head. Becky, want me to take the front? I think I might be stronger than I was before. Desiree offered. She was sure she could at least lift his shoulders up off the ground, and the legs would be lighter for Becky. No, I got it. Becky bit her lip and exerted more strength. She was only going around the corner, although she was not looking forward to seeing Jake, not after all she had said to him. But then again, if he did come back, would Desiree end up in her current state? Okay. Desiree was getting used to her new body. It did not feel as weird to be walking with such short legs. However, she did find it funny how she could walk on her hind legs without issue. She also liked the fact that she did not need clothes. It was kind of refreshing, as if something new was awakening inside her. Of course, she herself had not realized this yet. This is it, Becky announced as she motioned with her chin towards the door. The building itself was an office building. It was not just one company but many who had their offices here. Go get Jake and you, and have them help you bring Mike in. I need to go back for my stuff. Try to give them a small run down on my current condition. I don't want to scare them. Desiree wanted her things since she had some stuff she always kept on her that she got from her father, which she cherished. She really hoped he was okay. But besides that, she was not ready to meet with the other two yet. Becky was one thing since she saw it happen, but Jake and Yu did not. She wondered if they would despise her for becoming a monster. I will, and Isa, don't worry. I will stand on your side no matter what. Becky could tell Desiree seemed a bit hesitant about meeting others. While she put on a strong front, Becky knew right now Desiree was having many thoughts and worries running through her mind. Thanks. Desiree's lips curled up into a smile that looked slightly frightening since she had razor-sharp teeth in her mouth, but it was a genuine smile. She waved at Becky and took off back around the corner. She could feel a few monsters almost upon her. She wanted to make sure nothing happened to her friends, so she hoped she could fight in her current form. Her status menu was still up, since she had yet to have time to figure out how to close it, but she could see that her ice breath spell was not a spell, but more of an innate skill. It did not even require MP, which, if she was correct, stood for mana points. Gee. A familiar sound entered Desiree's ears as she turned the corner. A green figure was poking at the dead goblin on the ground. Another one? She couldn't help but frown, but she knew she had to get rid of it since it was actually very much one of the worst monsters out there for females. She wondered how many people have suffered already due to these green disasters. I can do this. I think... Oh. Desiree had no idea how to use her ice breath yet, but she still had claws and a tail. If she used the martial arts she has been learning since young, she should be able to deal with another goblin with ease. She lowered her body and got on all fours. To her surprise, she found that this was actually quite a comfortable position. After taking a deep breath, she charged forward. Her little body shot out like a rocket, much faster than she had ever expected. So fast that the goblin, who was not paying attention, only got to look up in shock before it was plowed into and smashed into the ground. Desiree stabbed her claws into its chest, piercing its skin easily and breaking through the bones of the goblin's ribcage as if they were made of butter. She clenched her fists around a soft object within and crushed it without mercy. She could only guess that this was the goblin's heart. You defeated a goblin scout experience points gained? Oh. So I can get experience by killing these things. That's good to know since I will need to work on leveling up to see if I can get a humanoid form at some point. Desiree could only bet on this assumption and hope it was true. She had no idea how long it would take to reach level 20, but she hoped it would not take too long. Of course, she would need to first figure out the ins and outs of how things are done before she could go grinding. Purple blood dripped from it, but she did not feel sickened by it at all, which she found strange. She had just crushed a living thing's heart with her bare claws, but she felt nothing from it. She wondered if this was because of her race change. Let's just hope I do not have to kill a human, anyway. Desiree wanted to clear her thoughts since they were going down a bad path. She looked at her stuff that was strewn about and sighed once more. She slowly walked over and began collecting her things. She made sure to grab her clothes in case she suddenly woke up naked the next day. She had no idea what was going on with the world right now. But she felt that she would need to get Becky to kill something to see if she would end up getting a system as well. If she does, good. If not, then she would need to protect her until they could meet up with her father. Chapter 3. Becky was currently checking Mike's pulse, while Jake and Yu stood at the side. Once she felt it was still strong, she let out a sigh of relief. I am not as good as Diza, but he should be fine for the time being. But I need to tell you two something. Where is Diza? You said she helped you bring Mike here, right? Why did she not come in? Jake asked. He knew he had no right to chase after her anymore, since he could only think about himself when it came to protecting his own life. He had gladly sacrificed her without even thinking about turning around to go back to help her. While I have a lot to say about your worry, she is fine for the most part. It's just that she's, not exactly like she used to be. Becky found it hard to explain. People would normally think she was nuts if she had said anything to begin with, but no. After she killed the goblin, she transformed into a baby dragon of sorts. What? Becky, this is no time to be joking around, Jake yelled out. He wondered just what the hell got into this girl for her to be making jokes at this time. He stepped forward and raised his hand. He was about to smack her and try to knock some sense into her. If you don't believe me, then fine, but you will see. She will be back after she gathers her things. But let me warn you. She is only about 4 feet tall and does not look like a human in any way. If you make any rude comments, scream, or make her feel bad, at this time, I do not think I would have an issue killing you for real." Becky snorted. She was not afraid of Jake at all. Although she was making a baseless threat, it made Jake's face pale. As she had thought, Jake was too much of a wuss to even think that her words were false. He even stumbled back a few steps just because of her words. "Jake, take it as the truth for now. We will find out as soon as Deza returns. Also, a man who raises his hand to a woman is no man unless you have a good reason to. Never raise your hand to a girl." You pulled Jake back, her words cold. She could understand if Becky was hitting him, and he was doing it in self-defense, but he was about to do it just because he got mad, which made her think even less of him. Human nature can be funny. During stressful times, people's true nature will be exposed. A person, male or female, who you had thought was a good and upright person could end up being a selfish person who only cares about themselves. While it is true that no one wishes to die, and only some are willing to sacrifice themselves for others, whether it is for love or another reason, it still did not sit well for you to have Jake, who would not even go back to check on whether or not Desiree was alive, or not to get mad over Becky's words. You also thought that Becky's words were hard to believe, but she did not seem to be saying them in a joking manner. Because of this, she wanted to wait and see for herself if Desiree had actually turned into a dragon, as Becky had said. Jake, on the other hand, did not want to believe a single word of it. He felt Becky was messing with him since she hated him now. He knew he had no place to be criticizing anyone, but he still worried about Desiree. Just because he already realized he was not in love with her, he still wished for her well-being. Why does it seem like you are all attending a funeral? Who died? A voice came from the side, causing everyone to turn their heads. Two sets of eyes landed on the short blue figure that looked like an oversized lizard standing on two legs with a backpack slung over its shoulder. Jake and Yu's expressions were that of shock. Yu had her mouth open wide enough that an egg could fit into it, and Jake's eyes were so wide that they might just fall out. Only Becky smiled brightly as she walked over to the blue figure and patted her head. "Glad you can make it, but did you run into trouble?" Becky noticed the blood on Desiree's claw. Yeah, I killed another goblin and got some experience points." "And don't pat my head. I am not a pet." Desiree swatted Becky's hand away, causing the girl to giggle. Couldn't resist. "But another goblin, huh?" Becky frowned. She was no stranger to goblins either. But more than that, she really wanted to know what was going on. "Did you happen to see anything strange? Anything that might tell us why these monsters are appearing? Or, more like, why you suddenly changed into a dragon?" "No idea, but the streets are semi-quiet. I can hear screams off in the distance followed by roars, so who knows what is actually going on? Is it just this area that turned into some kind of fantasy story? Or is it something that is happening all over the world? You would think the army would be out already, or at least the police. But we have not heard a single bit of gunfire." Desiree really found too many things strange, but before she could do more, she had to figure out her system and how it worked. She was sick of the screen blocking her view. She hadn't realized she was already used to being a dragon. "Desiree." Jake spoke hesitantly. He was unsure what he should say in this situation. Oh, if it isn't Mr. Scaredy Cat." Desiree gave a dragony smirk. She had heard everything from Becky already, so she was ready and willing to pick on him. "Yeah, and that's a little unfair, isn't it?" Jake cried out. But he did not say anything more. He had no right to argue. He slumped down onto the floor and hugged his knees, not wanting to be looked at. Desiree smugly lifted her snout in the air before turning serious once more. "How's Mike?" "Still asleep. His pulse is strong as far as I can tell from what you taught me before," Becky replied as she watched Desiree walk over to Mike and begin checking his pulse. They were in the front entryway of one of the office buildings not far from the school bus stop, where Mike, Jake, and you got on. Because it was an office building, only the front door was unlocked, so they could not go any further without a card key to get inside. It was the area where the mailboxes for each office were held. The carpet on the floor was nothing more than an industrial version that was easy to clean. It looked to have been cleaned just recently, if you did not count the new stains that the four of them had added to it. With white painted walls and wood trim, it looked neat and tidy as any entryway could be. Mike was leaning up against a side wall, while you sat on the floor next to him with a worried expression on her face. She was worried about Mike's condition. He had saved her when he could have just left her, and because of that, he was now unconscious. She couldn't help but be moved by his self-sacrifice. She knew she was not the best-looking girl around, and Mike might not be the cutest-looking guy, but he was someone who was willing to put himself in harm's way to save her, unlike a certain handsome boy who was still shaking in the knees. Desiree frowned as she let go of Mike's wrist. "I can't be sure what is going on. His pulse seems fine from what I can tell," as Becky said. "But other than that, unless we get him to a hospital, I do not think we will know what is really wrong with him. The only issue is that there is barely anyone around and monsters all over the place. Which means we will need to bring him there ourselves. The closest one is the Lenox Hill Hospital, which is on the other side of Bethesda Terrace. We are currently on West and 67th St. It will take us about 30 minutes or more on foot, rough estimate if we rush. But if we run into monsters, it will take longer. Which means..." Desiree looked up at Jake and pondered for a moment. "Jake, if you want to redeem yourself, then you will need to help us move Mike, unless you are willing to see your friend suck in a coma like this for who knows how long." Jake lifted his head. He really did not want to leave the safety of the building, but... He looked over at Mike and bit his lip. It was not like he could stay here forever. He knew this, but he was still scared of the unknown. He took a deep breath and stood up. I will carry him." "Are you sure?" "If you drop him out of fright, he might die. Then it will be on your head," Becky asked with a snort. This only fired Jake up more to do this task, as he was already annoyed with Becky from the earlier argument. "I won't drop him." "All right, no fighting. We will need to work together. I will take point with Becky watching the sides. You will follow behind Jake and assist him if needed. But before we go, I need to look at a few things. We will also need to search for weapons outside. There are plenty of cars, so we can just loot them for anything useful to protect ourselves with." Desiree was trying to be a realist. The situation was not a situation where they could just abide by common laws. Anything went now, and the most important thing for them at this time was protection. "Then just tell us when you are ready." Becky had no problems with Desiree's plan. She just hoped Jake would not wuss out again. No one else had an issue with Desiree's plan either. This allowed Desiree some time to figure out her new menu thing. She sat down next to the door with her hind legs crossed under her as she poked at the menu screen for a few moments before muttering, "Close status window." She had no idea if it would work, but luckily it did. So the window is voice activated? Open status window. Once more, a status window appeared in front of her. With a sigh of relief, Desiree closed the menu again, before standing up and going to open the door, but was quickly stopped by Jake. Where are you going? I need to see if I can cast my ice breath. If I can, then that means I can make our trip a little easier if it does not consume too much mana. Desiree replied. Wait, so you were not lying? You really have a game-type system? Jake asked. He thought it was a joke. Why would I lie about something so stupid? Do you think I like looking mentally insane? Luckily, I can open and close the menu now, or I would have to live the rest of my life with a blue transparent screen in front of me that only I can see. Jake, I did not realize you thought so little of me. Once we get to the hospital, you can stay there and watch over Mike. At least there, you will be safe. I hope, anyway. Desiree was unsure of many things, and she could only assume that they would be safe at the hospital. But with monsters that do not care for human life, or have any fear of a weapon, this might not be the case. What bothered her most about this situation was the lack of people. They lived in New York, one of the most populated cities in the country, yet there were so few people. Take this office building they were currently holding up in. There was no one around. Not a single person has come to the first floor to check things out. There were 2 cameras in this entryway. You would think they would have come out a long time ago to check on the kids that were taking refuge here. While it was human nature to protect oneself, this did not mean everyone was like that. Desiree stood on the front stoop of the stairs and looked around. She could see something across the street sniffing around. It looked like a gray wolf, but much bigger than any wolf she had seen on TV. She did not move and waited for it to pass by before stepping down off the stoop. She had no idea how strong the monster was, and right now she did not wish to find out until she understood her own abilities. She opened her menu and took a look at what she had access to. She quickly spotted a button next to the skills title. She reached out with her claw and poked the button, causing a new menu to appear. So this is the skill menu? Desiree was actually quite happy to see this menu. She hoped she could find something useful in it. Let's see. I can learn a lot, from attack skills to passive skills. Some mixed with magic, some not. But each one costs skill points which I do not have, sadly. Desiree let out a sigh. She had 2 skills, but from what she could tell, they did not use mana of any kind, it seemed. If this was the case, then she might be able to use her ice breath for as much as she wanted. These skills all state mana cost, and those that don't do not have any mana cost. Oh, the king of all skills is in this list as well. Desiree looked at the skill named Appraisal. This was a skill she wanted very much since it was a skill that would tell her what things were. In any game that did not do it automatically, it was a must-have skill. It costs only a single skill point, so I will get that and a few other single-point skills. There is even a basic first aid skill here which can heal minor wounds. Besides basic first aid and appraisal, she found another one called Toughened Skin and Everyday Magic. Everyday Magic cost 2 skill points, but it allowed her to cast a few spells that one would need in everyday life. This included spells called Spark, Cleanse, Drink, Dig, and Dry. Just from the names alone, she could figure out what they did. Desiree closed her menu screens now that she had a bit of an idea of what she wanted to do. She had no idea how many skill points she would get per level, but she did hope it was more than 1. If she got 2, she would get Appraisal and Basic First Aid to start, then Toughened Skin next. Then the level after that, she would get Everyday Magic. Okay, now to try out this ice breath. Desiree jumped up on top of a car and looked down the road. She was not too sure how she was supposed to activate the skills, but she found voice activation worked for her menu, so she decided to try it like that. She took a deep breath, aimed her snout toward the middle of the road and said, "Ice breath." Cold air began to build up around Desiree's mouth. A bright blue ball of cold energy slowly began to form. Ice formed in the air, and after about 5 seconds, a blast of cold, icy air shot out in a cone in front of her. The further out it went, the wider the range was. But the distance was about 30 feet. The road that was caught at the edge of the blast of cold air had a sheen of white and blue ice covering its surface. As the energy dissipated, Desiree closed her mouth and pressed her scaly lips together and opened her menu. So I don't need mana to use it, but its charge time is around 5 seconds. It lasts for about 20 seconds. Although, this is only at level 1. So if I level it up, the time and the duration might last longer. Desiree jumped off the car she was on and walked back towards the building where the others were. She figured she could try to charge it while fighting, but in order to test this out, she would need to do so while in a fight. She hated to admit it, but she was actually kind of excited that she was able to use all these new abilities. To her, what she just used was magic, something she could only see in games or on TV, but now, her scaly lips curled up slightly. While the situation is not good, it is not all that bad either. I just hope my father will recognize me. This was the only fear she had at this time. Ugin all right? So here's the deal. We will make our way through the terrace and then head to the hospital. If it is safe, you guys can stay there. I still need to go to my house and then to Lower Manhattan to try to get in contact with my father, depending on where he is at this time. But with the way things are, my guess is he is probably out on a call or locked down in the fire station. If he is still alive, that is. Desiree laid down her plans for what she was going to do. However, the last few words were hard to say for her. She was very worried about her father, and while she was unsure if he would recognize her, she hoped that he would at least not try to attack her. Wait, you are just going to leave us? What happens if the hospital is not safe? Jake cried out. Whether he realized it or not, he could only see Desiree as a means of staying alive. In his mind, he needed her protection if he wanted to make it through this situation. What happens after that is not my problem. Look, Desiree looked at the other three with narrowed eyes. Out of everyone here, the one I am closest with is Becky. If it came down to one of you and Becky, I would save her first. I am not trying to be mean or anything like that, but I am being realistic. That is just how it is. You save those who are family first. If it is possible, I would help you next, then Mike. Jake would be last. I literally have one skill I can use right now, and that is my ice breath, which takes 5 whole seconds to even activate. In that time, you can be killed or worse. What kind of crap is that? You would save me last. Desiree, all these years, I have been chasing you. I mean so little to you. Jake did not like hearing he would be first to die no matter what if it came to others. He disliked hearing this the most. He did not want to die, and Desiree was the only thing that could keep him alive. Are you an idiot? Why would I risk my life for someone who was not even willing to come and check if I was alive or not? Becky came even though she was scared out of her mind. Do you think she wanted to die? Do you think she wanted to go out into the unknown? No, she did not. But she still did. She even came over to me and treated me normally, even when I turned into a dragon. If she did not tell you ahead of time, what would you have done? Tried to kill me? Run for your life. Jake, don't screw with me. I do not owe you anything. As for feelings, there were never any feelings beyond friendship. I never liked you more than a friend I went to school with. That was it. Whether you want to hear what is coming out of my mouth or not is up to you. If you prefer to stay here, hiding until you starve to death, then stay here. If you want to help get Mike to the hospital, then carry him on your back, and I will do what I can to protect you until we get to the hospital. He is all I got. But as I said, if it comes down to you or Becky and Mike, I would save them first before you. Desiree looked at everyone there before turning around. Jake went silent. He could not argue with Desiree, since he was not as good with words as her. He could only clench his fists, grit his teeth, and hope things would go smoothly. Desiree took a few steps towards the door, when she heard Yu suddenly speak up. Dessa is right, you know. We should be thankful that she is willing to go as far as she is. As of right now, we do not know what else is out there besides the goblins and the wolf Dessa told us about when she came back. If we are attacked, I would understand her helping Becky before me, since I would do the same if I was in her position. I would save the one closest to me first. It is not like we are heroes of some kind of fantasy movie. This is real life. There is no plot armor that will save us from dying. Yu lifted her head and looked at Desiree with her big eyes, and smiled as she continued. So thank you. Thank you for doing so much when you do not need to. Becky giggled. Dessa is just a big softy as it is. But I will say she is right. I would do the same. I would save her before any of you. But that does not mean we will not try to help those we can if we are not in trouble ourselves. Plus, if we help Dessa kill a monster, maybe we can gain systems as well. If this is like a game, then as long as we get hit in, we may be able to gain a system like Dessa has. Although, I am not sure if we will change as she has. I was thinking the same. Because even then, those who only think about themselves can protect themselves from danger. Desiree added, before shaking her head. Let's get going. The more time we waste here, the more likely we will not meet up with anyone. Everyone nodded, agreeing with Desiree, even Jake, who reluctantly nodded as well before going over to Mike, and with Yu's help, put him on his back. The group then finally exited the entryway. As soon as they stood on the front stoop of the building, the group noticed a strange low-lying fog in the air. It was not something normally seen in the city, so it made things even stranger than before. Desiree took a deep breath before saying, "We will first search the cars for anything we can use as a weapon. Keep it light, so we can move quickly." Ooh. The sound of glass shattering could be heard as an alarm went off on the eerily quiet streets of New York City. Anything? Desiree asked as she poked her head through the now open door of the Honda that Becky had just broken into. I found a gun, Becky cried out. She nervously held a gun in her hand that was still in its holster and passed it to Desiree. Not bad. It's small, so you should be able to handle it. Desiree looked it over. Her father had a gun chest as well in his bedroom, so she knew how to check if it was empty or not. Becky, hit this button here, then pull this back to eject any bullets in the chamber. Just make sure this is always down like this, so that the safety is on when you are doing it, and never point it at anyone while doing this. Becky nodded her head, like a good student, and listened to Desiree's instructions. After checking the chamber and making sure it was unloaded, she was taught how to load a bullet and then load the gun again. Now, one thing to make sure of is to always have your finger off the trigger when walking. Only put it on the trigger when you are aiming at a monster. Understood. Becky nodded her head again. She felt like she had been doing that since the start. And lastly, Desiree leaned in and whispered into Becky's ear so that only the two of them could hear what was being said. Don't worry, I won't hand it to anyone. Becky knew that Desiree did not trust Jake. There was a chance if he got a weapon like this, that he might do something stupid in order to save his own life. Desa, I found a bat. You was next to find a weapon as she hopped out of the cab of a truck. All right, then we should be good. Jake is busy carrying Mike, so he can't carry a weapon. It will be up to the three of us to be the main fighters when it comes down to it. Desiree looked at Jake, who had a nasty look on his face. She wondered if he realized the kind of face he was making at this time. Desa, are you sure we can survive this? You asked in a low voice. She was clutching the bat in her hand so tightly that the white of her knuckles was showing. I can't answer that. I do not know what will happen next. I am just as nervous as you are, but I have no choice. I promised to try to help Mike, and the hospital is the only way. We may even get lucky, and only the Upper West Side is where the monsters are. We could cross the terrace to find out that they have a large army of soldiers standing there. Desiree answered honestly. This was truly how she felt and thought at this time. She would not give out false promises since she did not know what the outcome would be. The group slowly made their way across the street, which was now more like a scene out of an apocalyptic movie than anything else. The cars that were just left abandoned yet still locked up, the silence of no human traffic whatsoever. In a city this large, which is normally bustling with pedestrians, it was very strange to see it like this. Why are there no other people? Did we get hit by truck Kun and not know it? Becky asked softly, which almost made Desiree and you burst out laughing. Even Jake, who was in a bad mood, had his lips twitch upwards at her comment. My guess is they are either hiding or dead. Don't look. Let's go this way. Desiree stopped in her tracks and changed directions. They were just joking, but not far from the car she had led her friends around was a dead body that looked like it had been torn apart by some kind of monster. Blood was everywhere, and the scent of iron was heavy in the air, making Desiree's nose wrinkle up. Becky had caught a glimpse of it and backed up before quickly running to Desiree's side, almost bumping into you in the process. You did not dare look when Desiree told her not to, and just hurried along. Jake, on the other hand, got a good look as he passed by. His face grew pale, and the smell of iron was making him feel sick. So sick that he had to stop. Ooh! I said not to look. Jake, puke all you want later. For now, let's move. My nose is much more sensitive now than it was before, so the smell is affecting me 10 times more, maybe even 100 times more than it is you. Desiree couldn't understand how it was the girls that could keep it together more than he could. She did not understand why he was so scared of everything. Jake looked at Desiree's retreating back and quickly adjusted Mike's position on his back, then continued forward. He did not hold it against her for being tough on him. He had to admit she was much stronger than he could ever be at this time with how calm and collected she was. He also felt embarrassed that both girls kept their stomachs while he lost his. Desiree led the group to a side alley and stopped in front of the entrance. We will need to go down this alley as it is quicker and probably safer than taking the main roads. But there is one thing. I can sense something down here. It doesn't feel like the wolf I saw earlier or a goblin, but weaker. If this is the case, I want Becky and you to try to take it out while I hold it back. Becky, use a blunt weapon and save your bullets for emergencies. There is a pipe at the side, so use that. When I say to attack, attack. Chapter 4. A dark alley with trash cans and cardboard boxes cluttered up on each side. Water dripping from the air conditioners above caused pools of water to form on the cracked tar that lined the alleyway. Tufts of grass sprouted from these cracks, showing just how stubborn nature can be. Grass growing in the middle of the city, in a place where no grass should be. It was enough to make one wonder what would happen if there were no people here for a long time. Within this damp, smelly alley, 2 blue gelatin balls were slowly creeping across it. They were blue with a round red object in the center of them, something that both Desiree and Becky knew as the core of this monster. A slime. Now it feels more like an RPG. Becky suddenly got excited as she grasped the metal pipe she had picked up off the ground. She wondered if she would gain a system like Desiree if she actually killed this thing. Just be careful. We do not know how dangerous it can be, Desiree warned. She knew Becky was excited, but she wanted her to keep on guard as well. I know. Becky pursed her lips. She knew better than to overestimate herself. Okay, I will go in and see if they attack me. Then you two will each take one and bash away. Desiree slowly made her way forward. She did not know how slimes were in the real world, so she did not know if they would jump up at her or what, but the closer she got, she noticed that the slimes did not seem to be reacting to her at all. She walked straight up to them, and they just kept doing their thing. One was even feeding on a piece of cardboard. She could see it dissolving the cardboard inside its body. Dessa? Becky called out as she slowly came forward. She saw Desiree just standing there, so she was kind of confused. Becky, come here and stand at my side. Desiree wanted to see if these would attack her or not, but wanted to be ready for anything. If one were to attack Becky, she would jump in to protect her. Becky did as she was told and stood next to Desiree, yet the slime still did not react. Becky was confused as to what to do next. She never thought that slimes would not attack her. She actually felt like they were kind of cute, in a way, but not the kind of cute that would make her want to take one home. Well, hit it hard enough to break its core. You do the same to the other one. Desiree could tell there were no other monsters close by. Because of this fact, it made a good chance for these two to get their systems. That is, if her idea was right, and that they had to kill a monster to gain a system. Becky's eyes glowed as she raised her metal pipe, and then brought it down with everything she had. The pipe smacked into the slime, causing it to sink in. The core in the middle cracked and fell apart before dimming. The round gelatin could no longer hold together, and turned into a pool of liquid. Yu also dispatched her slime as well. Right after the slimes died, the two stumbled back before suddenly crying out in pain and falling to the ground. Just like Desiree, they were curled up in the fetal position with tears in their eyes as the pain consumed them. What? What is happening to them? Jake cried out as he stumbled backward. He could see that they were both in a lot of pain, and clouds of 2 different colors of fog, one white, one a light green, began to form around them. It's fine. This is the evolution process. They just got their systems. Desiree yelled out as she stood next to the 2 domes of fog. She was kind of expecting this, although she was not 100% sure either. The pain these two were going through was something she knew all too well. It was a pain she would never forget. She had no idea what they would become, but she did not care about this either. As long as they could level up and gain skills, that was all that mattered. You have to deal with such pain? Jake's face paled. He hated pain. He hated anything that would harm him. He was not sure if he wanted to get a system now. He would prefer to find a safe place to hide until all of what was happening finally passed. Desiree snorted at the sight of Jake's pale face. She had dealt with the pain. She knew Becky could definitely do it, and with how Yu was, she could do the same. 20 minutes passed, and the fog surrounding the two finally began to dissipate. What was revealed from the white fog that had surrounded Becky was almost a copy of Desiree, except with white scales that had a golden sheen to them, along with 2 pure white horns on top of her head. Next to Becky was a gray-haired wolf-looking figure that had a mane of flowing green hair. It rippled around as if the wind was passing through it. Both were standing on their hind legs, at around 4 feet tall, and looked quite cute for being monsters. Yu looked like a fluffy puppy more than a wolf at this time. I really did change, Becky cried out as she looked at her claws. She was swaying her tail back and forth and inspecting each part of her body. She felt quite funny how her body was so much different, but she also strangely felt it did not feel out of place. Strange but normal, 2 words that contradicted each other, but somehow fit together in this situation. Gessa, stop playing with my tail. Yu cried out. Desiree was already busy rubbing her blue-scaled cheeks all over Yu's fluffy tail, while Becky was engrossed in checking herself out. It's your fault for becoming fluffy, Desiree retorted, not stopping her fluffing. No fair. Becky hurried over and began scratching Yu's ear. The poor girl had tears in her eyes, but, for some reason, could not resist the pettings. A few minutes later, both dragon girls finally let Yu go. With a satisfied snort, Desiree turned to Becky and asked, Becky, what element are you? Light. I got 2 skills called Light Breath Level 1 and Dark Immunity Level Max, Becky replied excitedly. She was quite happy that she was going to be able to cast spells and level up now. And you? What about you? What race and element did you get? Judging by the green mane, Desiree was thinking Yu's element was wind, but she wanted to be sure. I am what is called a Fenrir, and I have wind/level 1 and wind resistance level 1, Yu replied with pursed lips. She wondered why she did not get a max resistance as well. Looks like we have more to go with now. The only thing... Becky, can you still handle the gun in your claws? Desiree asked. She knew she could, but she wondered if Becky would be okay now that she was no longer human. Should be fine. Becky replied as she picked up the gun that was on the ground and held it in her claw with ease. She still had 5 digits, so it was no different from before. You are about the baseball bat. Or are you going to be using your claws now? Desiree preferred using her claws as it seemed more natural to her. This was probably a racial instinct. I will use my claws. I do not know why, but it seems that it's more natural. It's hard to explain. Yu replied, while looking down at her claws that had pads on the palms. Okay, then. Becky will carry the gun and only use it when needed. I am hoping the loud noise might scare off any larger monsters, although that is probably doubtful. Let's move on! Kesare and her group slowly made their way to the end of the alley, bringing them to Central Park West. They had to cross the street here to enter Bethesda Terrace. If they followed Terrace Doctor all the way to Fifth Ave, they would be close to the Lenox Hill Hospital. A Fenrir, 2 dragons, and 2 humans stood at the edge of the road, looking back and forth at the long line of abandoned cars. Becky couldn't help but wrinkle her brow. It doesn't make sense. Besides the one body we have seen so far, there are no others around. It's like they all disappeared without a trace. Becky, I think you might be correct in this assumption. After all, with the number of people in New York City, just the Upper West Side would have a good number of people. Yet, there was barely anyone running earlier when the first goblin showed up. As we still do not know what happened, or what is causing any of this, we must keep going and hope that Mike can get proper treatment. Desiree sighed and looked at Mike, and then at Jake, who was sweating. Jake, I want to get you a system as well if you want, but first, we need you to bring Mike into the hospital. The 3 of us cannot go close to the hospital if it is being guarded. Jake nodded his head. He could understand this fact. Then please keep me alive until then. Don't worry. As long as we are not in serious trouble, I will stop at nothing to protect you at this time. I think this goes for Becky and you as well, right? Desiree looked at the 2 girls, who nodded their heads. So, while it is not a complete promise, we will do what we can. Jake clenched his fists. He understood that Desiree was not backing down from her earlier statement. But at least he knew they would not just leave him if things were not too bad yet. The group carefully crossed the street and stepped into Bethesda Terrace, a part of Central Park known for its prominent displays of art and architecture. What was normally a busy part of the park was now nothing but a ghost town with no foot traffic at all. Geza, shouldn't we just walk straight across instead of taking Terrace Doctor? You asked. She did not see a reason to be taking the main road through if they could just cut through the park. Yeah, you are right. I wasn't thinking right before. I was thinking there would be more people, and it would be dangerous, but Desiree looked at the foggy path ahead and could feel that there were a few monsters ahead of them, but could not determine where they were exactly. She was still getting used to this kind of sixth sense thing. She wondered if Becky and you had this same feeling. Becky, do you sense anything ahead of us? Now that you mention it, I smell something, stinky, but I'm unsure what it is exactly. You replied. As part of a wolf-type race, her senses were quite sharp already, but as a Fenrir, they were even sharper than a dragon's. I can smell something, but I can't figure out where it is, Becky replied. She had her snout in the air and was smelling around. I'm the same. It will be up to you to help determine if something is closer than it should be and a threat. Without your warning, we might end up in a dangerous position. Desiree did not want anything bad to happen to those here. While she might throw Jake under the bus, the rest were good people. On it! You nodded as she extended her claws. Desiree was surprised that you was doing things so naturally. Then again, it was the same for her. It just came naturally. Natural instincts seemed to have been ingrained within them after they evolved, which helped them cope with the sudden change of stature and race. If it was not for this, all 3 of them would not be as they are now and would still be trying to deal with the sudden change. They walked for about 10 minutes before you smelled something getting closer. There's it's big. You stay by Jake and Mike. Becky, you take the left side, I will go right. Remember, it takes about 5 seconds to charge your attack. It is also voice activated, as I said before. Take a deep breath before you start your attack. I do not know what your attack is like, or if it uses mana, so try to pay attention to whatever is happening. I will freeze it with my ice breath. Desiree gave out orders which everyone quickly put into action. She had become the group's leader without anyone making a single complaint about it. Desa, you sound like a raid leader. Becky teased as she took her position. As of now, we have to take every fight as if we are fighting a raid boss. So pay attention. This is not some VR game. This is real life. Desiree did not want to leave room for error. She wanted to keep everyone from getting harmed. She just hoped it would not come down to abandoning someone. That would not sit well with her. I know. A rotting smell started to fill the air. It was so strong now that even Jake could smell it, causing him to wrinkle his nose. What is this smell? Shh. Desiree turned and glared at Jake, who quickly closed his mouth. He knew he just messed up. In a situation where the people who will do the fighting are being quiet, he, as the onlooker and the one being protected, should not make a sound. Desa, you, whispered before motioning with her claws and holding up one claw. Desiree nodded and got ready to fight. Becky also lowered her head slightly, ready to pounce on whatever it was that was about to arrive. A shadow slowly formed in the thick fog. It was tall and humanoid-shaped, but the way it was walking was very strange. It seemed to have a slight shuffle in its step, as if one of its legs were being dragged behind. Desa, I think this is... Becky was about to confirm what was approaching them when the figure finally came fully into view. A young woman, well, if you could call her a woman. Her blue business suit was ripped in many places, exposing more than what should be exposed. Some might take pictures of such a scene. That was, if she did not have a huge hole in her chest with rotting flesh hanging off her body. Her dirty blonde hair was all over the place, and even had dirt and sticks sticking out of it. On her feet was a single blue high-heel shoe, while her other foot was twisted and mangled. It was disgusting enough to make one feel sick to their stomach, but Desiree felt something was off. Don't attack unless attacked. Becky and Yu quickly backed up, but kept their gazes on the zombie. This was all they could call it, since it was a picture-perfect example of what a zombie would look like. Desiree walked forward and stood in front of the group. She looked at the female zombie with narrowed eyes. Stop where you are. Desiree's voice filled the air. The female zombie actually came to a stop. Her mouth opened as if she was going to say something, but only a mournful groan came out of her mouth. The female zombie raised its hand to its throat and shook its head. But the message was clear. Desiree understood that this zombie was sentient, and was probably a human who turned into a zombie, like how she turned into a dragon. It was just that it could not talk normally. She took a deep breath before saying, I guess you used to be human like me. Since you cannot talk, can you still remember how to write? This time the female zombie nodded its head, and with great difficulty, bent over and began scratching the ground with the tip of its finger, which had no skin on it. My name is Claire. A green thing attacked me here in this park while on my way to work, and I somehow killed it. Before I knew what was happening, a window appeared before me. Then I felt a great pain, and before I knew it, I was like this. What is going on? Why am I like this? I want to die. But I can't. I even stabbed at my own heart, but it did nothing. I jumped from a large staging area in the park and bashed my head, causing it to fall off, but it somehow reattached itself. I do not want to be like this. Please kill me. The female zombie's head sagged as she knelt on the ground holding her head. Desiree could tell if the female zombie could cry, She would be drowning in tears at this time. She felt pity for the female zombie. She knew it must be hard looking like this, becoming something you would only see in the movies. I understand. Desiree took a deep breath before letting it out. This was not an easy decision for her. She did not like the idea of killing another human unless they were trying to harm her or her loved ones, but this was something that one could not cure. But before I do what you asked, let me ask you. If you say status, can you see a window appear? The female zombie lifted her head. She let out a mournful groan, and a blue window appeared before her. She stared at it in a daze before looking up at Desiree with questioning eyes. What are your evolution requirements? Desiree asked. There was a chance, even if it was little, that her next evolution might change her appearance a little to something better than what she looked like now. So she did not want the female zombie to give up just yet. The female zombie quickly scribbled on the ground. I need to reach level 20 and eat the brains of 3 elite monsters. A strange look appeared on the female zombie's face. It was one of disgust. Of course, this was understandable since not many would rightfully want to eat the brains of another animal unless they had no choice. Desiree realized that it seemed that reaching level 20 was the bare minimum for the second evolution. The same went for you and Becky as well. They too needed to reach level 20 before they could evolve. I am only assuming this, but I believe with each evolution, there is a chance to have your body change in one shape or another. I cannot be certain, but it is a high possibility. If we can change into these forms, there is nothing saying we cannot regain a decent humanoid form after evolving a few times. If you are willing to do it, you can try leveling up first to reach your evolution requirements and see if that helps. If you still do not change for the better, then I will do as you ask. How about that? Oh, the female zombie, Claire, stared at the ground with her finger in the dirt for almost a full minute before finally nodding her head. If there is a chance, then I will try. How do I level up? From what I can understand at this time, killing other monsters. Although I do hope you do not attack me or my friends. But goblins, the green little man you killed to end up like this, might give you some decent experience. Or maybe the blue balls of gelatin, slimes which we found in a back alley. Those do not attack at all, but I am not sure how much experience you will get from any of these things, especially the slimes. But one can only push forward and grind like no tomorrow. I plan to do just that once I reach the hospital, Desiree explained. Claire lowered her head and began scribbling on the ground once again. Thank you. I'd planned to die, but if there is now a chance, I will do what I can and kill those disgusting green monsters with everything I have. Also, I am not sure how the hospital is. As far as I know, humans have been disappearing left and right. Be careful. Your form will not be liked by those who have not changed like us. Desiree smiled and nodded her head. I will. Take care of yourself. After saying their goodbyes, the group left Claire behind. Claire stood up, looked in the direction Desiree and the rest left, and clenched her fist. She was now determined to live. As long as she can reach level 20 and eat the 3 brains, she might have a chance to make things better. Better than her current situation, that is. She looked down at the words written on the ground and used her mangled foot to wipe the dirt away. Only after she had done all that did she turn and vanish back into the fog. Desiree once more pushed forward. She had her cell phone in her hand as she tried to call her father once more. She still could not get through. It was not just her who was worried about their parents either, but everyone was worried. Claire's words at the end about people disappearing were only now setting in. I wonder how much of humanity has disappeared, Jake mumbled softly, but since the three girls had a heightened sense of hearing, now they could still hear what he had said. At least we got a bit more information. I had found it odd that there were not a lot of people around, and thought that maybe they had just up and disappeared, but now I guess I was in the right line of thinking. Desiree sighed. I just hope a doctor or two are left at the hospital. What do you plan to do if it is infested with monsters, or if there are no doctors? Jake asked out of curiosity. He had not heard all of Desiree's plans as of yet. Find a slime and make it so that Mike kills it. Maybe undergoing evolution will wake him up. Desiree was not sure if it would work, but it was worth a try at the very least. Would he be able to handle the pain? Jake knew the evolution process was painful, so he was unsure if Mike would be able to take it in his current state. I am not sure. This is why, if something happens, I will be the one to do it. Since I came up with the idea, I would not leave the aftermath to you all. Desiree was really not sure what would happen. If Mike ended up dying due to her idea, it would end up being not only her fault, but also the person who helped Mike kill the slime. This was why she would do it herself, instead of forcing someone else to do the deed, since it risked killing an innocent life. Deza, you are strong, but you do not need to shoulder the burden all by yourself. If it comes down to that, I will be the one to do it. I owe Mike my life. I will do anything to help him. You suddenly spoke up. If not for Mike, she would have been crushed by the car. He had saved her without care for his own life. Now he was in this situation where he was unconscious. Desiree looked at you and could see that she was being serious. Everyone here was. We will do it together. The group continued forward with only the fog blocking their path. Luckily, the landmarks around them were something that they all knew, so it was easy to tell where they were. They quickly passed through the park and reached 5th Avenue. I don't see any army. I only mentioned it as a what if. Desiree pursed her scaly lips and glared at Becky, who stuck her tongue out at her. I wonder why you became a dragon. What is wrong with me becoming a dragon? Becky snorted and gave Desiree a nudge. Because you never liked dragons as much as me. Didn't you like elves or something like that before? Why did you become a dragon, of all things? Should have become an elf so some orc could whisk you away. Desiree snorted back. The two girls glared at each other before looking away, crossing their arms and humping. Then not even 2 seconds later, they both burst out laughing. What is that? Why would you damn me to some orcs? You are such a bitch, sometimes. Ha 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 ha. Becky hugged Desiree, who smiled, although scarily. Desiree stuck her tongue out at Becky as she pushed away from her and said, I was just joking. Anyway, it looks like we will not be shot today, so let's try heading to the Lenox Hill Hospital. More streets devoid of human life filled their vision. Desiree was hoping that no matter what happened in the near future, her father would still be alive. She felt that no matter what form he took on, she would recognize him right away. He was the man that raised her, and was also the only family she had left in this world. There could be no way she would not recognize him. When this is all over, I'm finding my father a wife. That Claire girl seemed nice. Dessa, did you say something? Becky could have sworn that Desiree had said something just now, but when she saw Desiree shake her head, she began to think that maybe she was just hearing things. Wait. Desiree stopped and lowered her body slightly. Something is coming. This time Desiree did not notice any smell of any kind, but felt a strong vibration underfoot. It was subtle at first, so it did not really make her think too much about it. But those vibrations quickly grew strong and stronger. You protect Jake and Mike. Becky, to the left, I will take the right. Got it. Okay. Becky and you answered at the same time. They quickly got into the formation that had been decided on while walking. The vibration on the ground got stronger and stronger until, finally, even the streetlights were shaking. The doors and windows on the buildings also shook. It was as if an earthquake was hitting the city. It did not take long to see what was coming towards them, a group of large gray beasts with hairy long upper arms and short legs. Its face had 3 large eyes and a nose that was pushed into its face, leaving only the 2 holes for it to breathe from. But the thing that made these beasts, or more like monsters, scary looking was their large wide mouths that went from the edge of one of their hairy pointed ears to the other. They had their mouths open, which revealed 2 rows of razor-sharp looking teeth, and a long black tongue that hung out ever so slightly with a black liquid dripping off of it. They pushed down the street, tossing any car or truck that was in their way to the side. When they spotted the small group ahead, one of them roared, rattling the windows around them, and began moving faster toward Desiree and her group. Dessa, I do not think we can fight those. Becky was the first to see that the situation might be bad. There were 4 monsters, and 3 of them, who were all level 1, plus Jake, who had yet to gain a system and his first evolution, and then Mike, who was unconscious. They had no way to fight these monsters, of which they had no idea what their levels were, and hoped to survive without injury. Everyone into the building. Becky, you break the door down. Desiree made an immediate judgment. Until she leveled up and got the appraisal skill, she had no plans to fight unknown monsters, especially ones that looked like they could swallow her whole. On it! Becky did not hesitate in the slightest as she ran towards the building next to them, up the front stoop, and slammed her body into the door, breaking it off its hinges. Open! All right. You help protect Jake's back while he makes it up the stairs. Desiree knew they were too short to help Jake physically, but that did not matter. They only had less than a minute before those grey monsters arrived, and she could tell their eyes were staring right at her. Jake, hurry up. You yelled out. She was standing in front of Jake, but Jake was not moving at all. It was as if he was frozen in fear. Desiree turned to see Jake just standing there and was starting to get aggravated. He was picking now of all times to freeze in fear. Jake, if you do not want to die, then move your ass. Otherwise I will take Mike and you, and I will run to safety instead of trying to protect you. It seemed the word die sunk in, and Jake finally snapped out of his frozen state. His face was pale as he adjusted his grip on Mike and quickly ran up the steps. You and Desiree were not far behind him, backing up with each step he took until they had all entered the building. But just because they entered the building did not mean they were going to be safe. One of the grey monsters roared as it watched the prey it had just been charging at try to hide from it. Its roar shattered nearby windows all around it. In its anger, it bashed a car that was in its path and sent it flying into a storefront not far away. It stared at the building its prey ran into for a few seconds before roaring once more and charging toward it. Not good. Desiree yelled out as she saw the grey monster charging right at them. Quickly make your way to the stairwell. They had only just started to turn to run when a loud explosion of brick and metal could be heard behind them. As the debris shot forward, A large clump of cement and brick smashed into Yu's back, sending her flying forward. "You!" Becky cried out and ran over to her side to check on her. Desiree was still pushing Jake forward, but she had already opened her mouth and was charging her ice breath. She did not want anyone she knew to die. Not when they had made it this far. She dodged a few bricks before finally shouting, "Ice breath!" Chapter 5. A stream of ice shot out in a cone in front of her and smashed into the huge monster that had just broken through the wall to enter the building. Ice began to form on its huge body as it stumbled backward. Desiree didn't even think to look at the monster any longer as she stopped the channeling of her ice breath. Let's go." Desiree picked Jake up by his legs, taking Mike with them as she ran towards the stairwell door. She turned to see Becky hot on her tail, and the monster with a partially frozen body not far behind, but now much slower. She kicked the door of the stairwell open and dropped Jake to his feet. "Go up and do not stop. If you drop Mike, I will kill you myself, so you better not leave him behind." Jake's face paled as he began running up the stairs. With Mike's weight piled on top of him, he was already sweating after a few steps and having a hard time breathing. Luckily, Yu and Becky quickly went to his side and took Mike from him. "Just go. We will handle Mike. But do not stop for anything." Becky gave Jake a dirty look as she and Yu began running up the stairs. While Mike's legs were dragging behind them, it was at least faster than Jake carrying him. Jake had already been left in the dust as he struggled to climb the steps. He was scared and out of breath. He felt like he was going to die just from breathing. Desiree couldn't take it anymore and quickly lifted him up by his legs again as she ran up the stairs following after the other two. All the while, the monster once more lost sight of its prey, angering it to no end. It smashed its body against the stairwell door entrance, trying to force its way up, but this stairwell was built in a different way than other buildings. It had metal plating inside the concrete, which made it harder for the monster to push its body through. The metal was bending under its weight, but since it was almost a fully solid construction, it was having a more difficult time than it had with the entrance. The width of the staircase leading up was also another factor that would not make it easy for the monster to traverse. Desiree's split decision to take the stairs was the right call, even if she did not mean it to be. She was only thinking of trying to escape the monsters in the quickest way possible, and since the stairs were the closest thing to her, she made a sudden judgment which turned out to be the best decision. "How far are we going?" Becky asked as they continued to rush forward. They were now 5 floors up, and almost to the 6th floor. "We will exit to the next floor," Desiree replied. She felt it didn't matter which floor they got off at as long as they were able to escape the monsters. They pushed open the 6th floor door and stepped into the hallway. The building they were in seemed to be an apartment building. Desiree looked around and frowned slightly. She didn't realize the kind of building they entered until now, and hiding in a hallway was not an option. "You, take Becky and listen in on the doors. If you effing inside, break the door open so that we can still close it. I will protect Mike and Jake." "All right. Becky, let's go." Yu grabbed Becky's hand, and the two went over to the first door, where Yu pressed her ear against the door and stood there quietly. While they were doing a check, Desiree turned and looked at Jake, who was as pale as a ghost and having a hard time breathing. She clicked her tongue before walking over to him and patting him on the back. "Jake, use your shirt to cover your nose and mouth and take deep breaths." She did not have any kind of bags inside her backpack that she had still strapped to her back, so she was unable to give him anything of that nature. She could give him her bag itself, but she refused to do that, as it had her treasures inside. No one was allowed to even look at her treasures. She had not even realized her dragon instincts were starting to surface. A loud roar came from below and echoed through the stairwell, making it seem more horrifying than before. The building was even shaking a little, as the monster downstairs was struggling to get up the stairs after pushing its body in. "Dessa, it's open," Becky announced as she came over. Desiree was lost in thought, because she was trying to decide whether or not she should check on the monster's situation. If its big body got stuck in the stairwell, then she would have a chance. "Becky, you take Jake and Mike in. Find a bag of some kind for Jake to breathe into and tell him to keep taking deep breaths, or he might die from hyperventilating. I will go check on the situation with the monster." Desiree took a deep breath. She hoped she was not sending herself to her doom, but if this monster was truly stuck, then things would work out in her favor. If she could reach level 2, then she just might be able to get appraisal and first aid. The first aid skill might come in handy in healing Mike. It says it heals minor wounds, although she did not know if Mike's current situation could be considered minor or not. Becky was reluctant to let her friend go. She was afraid something bad might happen to her. "I will be fine. I can use my ice breath to slow them like before, so I am the best person." Desiree was not lying when she said this. But she also knew that if she was by herself and the monster decided to chase her, she could lead it away from her friends, allowing them some much-needed rest. Becky sighed and hugged Desiree. "Be careful. If you are not back in 10 minutes, I will come looking for you." Desiree promised Becky she would do her best to be back within 10 minutes, then entered the stairwell. She could hear the roaring and thrashing about coming from below. Is it still on the first floor? Desiree was unsure, but she did wonder if this was the case. Not wanting to charge right in, she slowly made her way down the stairs, keeping her body low. She wished this was one of those stairwells that she could peek out over, but it was probably because it wasn't that was keeping the monster busy. At each turn, she would peek around the corner, and only when it was clear did she begin moving down the stairs again. The roars and struggling got louder and louder. By the time she reached the 3rd floor, she had to stop moving forward as she could smell the stench from the monster's body, as if it was right on top of her. Desiree did not want to be caught off guard, so she backed up a few steps to the previous landing, where she took off her backpack. She then took out her phone and switched the camera into selfie mode. Once she was set, she went back down the steps and to the bottom landing on the 3rd floor. She took a deep breath and edged her phone out over the stairs, leading down to see what she could see. It seemed like the monster had gotten stuck. Her scaly lips curled up as she realized she was one lucky dragon. She quickly ran back up the stairs to her backpack and put her phone away. She could not let her treasure get damaged in a fight, so after a moment's thought, she picked up her backpack and went up a few floors and stashed it in a corner. Only then was she willing to leave it behind. As she went back downstairs, she stopped off on the 3rd floor to grab a fire extinguisher. This fire extinguisher was going to play a key role in her fight, as it was going to be used as a means to instantly blind the monster while she began her attack. She had no idea how strong she was, but she hoped she was strong enough to deal some damage to this monster. Because of the close quarters and her lack of training with her ice breath, she did not think it would be good at this time to use it. Although it did come in handy in emergency situations. It was just the charge time that was keeping her from using it. After working out her plan in her mind, Desiree took a deep breath and finally stepped out around the corner. She pulled the pin and readied the fire extinguisher as she made her way down the stairs to where the arm was gripping the wall. It was a huge arm that took up quite a bit of the space between the two walls, which made Desiree feel even luckier. If the monster was not as big as it was, she would never be able to get this close without fearing for her life. After taking a second deep breath, she let it out slowly and decided it was time. She only needed to be careful of its claws. The rest would be easy. She dashed forward, jumping over the flailing claw and using the wall as a springboard. Roar! The large monster was angered by the sudden stinging sensation in its eyes. It began flailing about even more violently, but every time it opened its mouth, it sucked in a mouthful of a strange substance it had never encountered before. It began to choke on the air it was taking in, and at the same time, it suddenly felt a heavy impact on its head. Desiree smashed the fire extinguisher onto the monster's head, sending the monster's head into the stairs with a loud thud, even cracking the cement it was made out of. This caused a pained roar to escape the monster's lips. Desiree did not stop there, though. She jumped up and swiftly spun her body around, landed back on top of the monster's head, and jabbed her claws into the monster's eyes, making sure to permanently blind it. The monster's head raised up as it howled in pain, almost knocking her backward and down the stairs. Desiree did not wait for it to try to reach up and attack her, but instead jumped off its head and landed in front of it as she watched it flail about and grab at the top of its head, thinking that she was still there. She waited for the right moment and rushed in once more right as the monster reared all the way up, exposing its chest. Using all her strength, she stabbed out with her claw, penetrating the monster's chest and breaking through its bones. She felt an oddly shaped object in her claws, clenched down on it, and pulled with all her might. Blood sprayed all over her as her claw exited the monster's body, drenching her from head to toe. In her hand was a blue pulsating object that she immediately crushed. The grey monster stopped flailing back as its body went limp and fell to the floor with a loud thud. You defeated a grey back experience points gained. Level up. Level up? Desiree stumbled back a few steps and looked at the massive body that was now limp in front of her, and then at the system messages, and let out a laugh. I did it. Ha ha ha. I even got 2 levels. She was happy. But she knew one thing. If this monster was not stuck like it was, she would not have been able to kill it so easily. No, it is more like she would have become a snack for this monster. Desiree did not dare stick around, as she quickly returned to where she left her backpack. But when she arrived, before she picked it up, she looked down at herself and frowned. She knew Becky and the others would freak out if they saw her like this. I should probably wash up, but if I do not hurry back, Becky will. Deza. What happened? Why are you covered in blood? Becky was right on cue. She stood in front of Desiree and began checking her over, but got confused when she saw no wounds. I am fine. The monster was stuck in the stairwell, and I used a few tricks to my advantage. Desiree explained. She looked down at herself and sighed. Is the water in the apartment working? Yeah, let's get you cleaned up. Becky nodded and went to pick up Desiree's bag for her, only for her claws to get slapped away before they could even touch it. She looked up at Desiree with a confused expression. Deza. My treasure. Desiree used one of her claws to pick up the bag, trying to be careful not to get blood on it before walking up the stairs, leaving a very confused Becky behind. Although it did not take much time for her to figure things out. Treasure? Wait. Dragon. Treasure. Ha ha ha. Inside the apartment that Becky and Yu broke into, Desiree was currently lying in a hot bath. The building still had power, which she found strange, but at the same time was happy about since it meant she could now have a hot bath. She laid back in the tub and looked at the blue screen in front of her. Oh, my health and mana jumped quite a bit in 2 levels. World Order System name: Desiree Harris Race, Straggling Age, 14 level, 3 monster rank, F evolution requirements, reach level 20 and kill 3 rank E elites, HP 150, 150 MP, 70 skill points, 10 skills, ice, breath, will immunity. I guess this means I get 5 points per level, like any RPG I have played. Since that is the case, Desiree opened her skill menu and began searching for the skills she wanted to get. First on her list was Appraisal, costing only 1 skill point, which she was happy to spend. She also took First Aid and Toughened Skin, which all cost only 1 skill point. This left her with 7 skill points. Next was Everyday Magic that cost 2 skill points, which she was sure would come in handy later on. Skill points: 5 skills Ice, Breath, 1 Caveat immunity. Desiree had decided to check her skill menu to see how things would work, and to her surprise, each spell from Everyday Magic showed up in the skill area and were all at level 1. That is neat. I wonder what these 5 spells can do when they hit max. Anyway, let's test Appraisal first. Desiree held a bar of soap in front of her and whispered the activation word. Appraisal, a used bar of soap. Used for cleaning one's body. Smells like a spring breeze. Sell 1 silver heme. You can sell it? 1 silver? Desiree did not really understand, but at least now she knew she could identify things. She hoped it worked on monsters as well. Desiree looked at First Aid next, and wondered if her Appraisal would work on the menu. Appraisal. First Aid heals minor damage, can heal flesh wounds, broken bones, and minor concussions. Cannot heal illness. Cost 60 mana. 1 part stuck out to Desiree within the description. Minor concussions, huh? I will need to try it on Mike. Knowing there was no time like the present, Desiree got out of the bath and used dry magic to dry her body. To make sure she was perfectly clean, she used cleanse as well. She felt extremely clean after using the cleanse magic. Although she still liked hot baths, she knew this would come in handy for those times when she could not bathe. She still had 5 skill points, which she did plan to use since she saw that she could get a basic element magic attack for the price of 5 status points. But before she decided on which element, she wanted to try to heal Mike first. All done? Becky asked as she stopped, tilted her head, and looked at the blue-scaled dragon girl. Why do your scales look extra shiny? Probably because I used cleanse magic on my body. Here, I will use it on you too. Desiree spoke the activation word, and not even a second later, Becky felt a wind swirl around her. As if all the dirt on her body had been sent into the void, her white scales that had been slightly dirty were now perfectly clean and sparkling under the light of the room. Amazing! Becky's scaly lips curled up. She felt that maybe this system thing was not so bad after all. What spell is this? It's a spell I got from getting Everyday Magic, which cost me 2 skill points. After leveling up 2 times after killing the grey monster, I got 10 skill points, so 5 per level. Desiree had a smug expression on her face. She was winning in the level up department. Lucky! I want to level up too. I should have followed you secretly. Becky pouted. But she was happy to know a few things about the level ups. She listened to Desiree as she explained how much health and mana she got as well. I will help you level up soon, but before anything, I need to see if my first aid skill will heal Mike. Desiree went to the bedroom where Mike was lying on the bed, covered up to his chest, in a blue comforter. Sitting next to him, watching over him, was Yu. She had a worried expression on her wolf-like face. "How is he?" Desiree asked as she walked over to the side of the bed. "His pulse is strong, and he is breathing normally, but still no signs of waking up." She had no idea how he would react when he saw her in her new form for the first time. She knew there was a chance he would push her away and be scared of her. She knew this and was willing to deal with being seen as a monster. She just wished he would wake up. Nothing more, nothing less. "I just got some new skills, so let me try to heal him. But no promises." Not waiting for you to answer, Desiree hopped up onto the bed and stood over Mike. She reached out with one of her claws and placed it on Mike's head. First aid. A dim green glow flowed out of her hand and enveloped Mike. The dim green glow lasted for almost 3 minutes before finally disappearing. Desiree removed her hand and jumped off the bed. She had no idea if her skill was effective or not, but she did know it took a good deal of mana to use the skill. Almost half of her current amount. While this skill could not be used in battle, she had no time to care about that as she stared at the young male teen on the bed. Her eyes locked onto his. There had been no movement all this time, but now. "I think it is working." Mike's eyes began to flutter. He had no idea what had happened to him after he passed out. He only remembered pulling Yu to safety before blacking out. He slowly opened his eyes, making sure to let his eyes adjust to the bright light. "Where am I?" Mike's eyes landed on the dog that was sitting in a chair next to him, and felt slightly confused, mainly because the dog was sitting like a human, and second, the eyes were staring at him excitedly. Duh. Wait. Did I get isekai'd? No, silly. Yu's lips curled up into a smile, seeing that Mike was now okay. Mike stared at the dog who had just spoken to him and felt shocked, yet at the same time, the voice was very familiar. He tilted his head to the side and asked, "You?" "The one and only." "I am surprised that you could recognize me." Yu replied and hopped down from the chair and onto the bed. She moved over and placed her paw on Mike's cheek. "Thank you for saving me. Should I leave?" Desiree was starting to feel like the third wheel here. She had been standing on the bed this entire time, but was being fully ignored right now. "Ha. No. Dessa, thank you." Yu replied as she turned and looked at the blue-scaled dragon girl. "Your spell worked, and now Mike is okay again. He might be awake, but he will need to stay in bed for a while." He hit his head hard, so even if the first aid woke him up, he needs to rest and make sure there are no lasting side effects. Luckily, this apartment is filled with food. So I will leave Mike in your hands. I still need to see if I can find my father. I might not be able to return until tomorrow. I will have Becky stay here to help protect you guys. So you and Becky will be in charge of defense. Desiree paused her words and fell into thought for a moment. She felt that it would not be good if both of them went to sleep at night. You will take the first night watch, and Becky will take the second. So wake her up around midnight. I will destroy part of the wall downstairs and pile up some rubble in front of the door to try to keep any monsters out. While we have not seen any yet, do be careful of the windows for any monsters that might have climbed up or are able to fly. Desiree did not know what to expect, so she wanted to try to think of any scenario that they might run into. Also, no matter what you hear at night, do not open that door for anyone. Understood? Make sure you give Becky the rundown as well. You had long recognized Desiree as their leader. Because of her, they were able to get this far. I will. Oh, if Jake does anything to piss you off, just knock him out with a chop to the back of the neck. I can heal him after. Desiree left these words as she chuckled and walked out of the room, politely closing it to give the two inside some alone time. After the door closed, Mike stared at the door in confusion. His eyes drifted to you, who smiled and said, "That was Desiree, and because of her, you were able to wake up." She was determined to bring you to the hospital, and even fought monsters that could have killed her all by herself. We ended up running into some huge monsters before we could reach the hospital and took up refuge here. Luckily, she was able to kill one of the monsters, and leveled up, gaining a skill called First Aid, which healed you. I see. I will need to thank her. Mike relaxed as he leaned back. I need to get used to this. Everything seems like a dream. Can you tell me everything that has happened so far? While you filled Mike in on the details of everything that had happened thus far, outside the room, Desiree spoke with Becky, who had just finished making some food. So you will be leaving for a while? Just for now. When I come back tomorrow, I will bring 2 slimes with me to let both Jake and Mike evolve. I just need you to stay here to help protect them, but... Desiree leaned in close, and, in a low whisper, said, "If it seems hopeless, run away. Leave them, and run. I will not think any less of you." I will. Dessa, be careful out there. And good luck finding your dad. And if you can, please see if my parents are home as well. If you have time, that is. Becky began to tear up. She wondered if her parents were okay as well. Don't worry, if I see your parents, I will bring them to you. I promise to protect them. Desiree was not going to leave her friend here worried about her own family. She would be sure to try to find something out, if anything, about her mother and father as well. Thank you, Dessa. Becky hugged Desiree before stepping back and turning towards the food on the coffee table. Eat a few bites before you go. Desiree smiled and did as she was told. Becky only cooked some simple instant noodles, but it was still better than nothing. After a few bites, she said her goodbyes and headed out of the room. Her first task was to break up a wall to get as much rubble as she could. She did not go down the same stairwell she came up on, but instead made her way down the other stairwell down the hall and went to the floor below. She already knew she was much stronger than her human form by many times. Her scales were also quite powerful. With these new features combined, she felt it should be quite easy for her to bust down a wall and make enough debris to block the door to the apartment that Becky and the others were in. When she reached the 5th floor, Desiree found an empty apartment and began punching away at the walls. The concrete that made up the outside wall of the apartment rapidly began to break up into huge chunks as she punched and pulled at the wall, purposefully breaking it apart into chunks as big as she could get. After gathering enough rubble, Desiree used a large blanket from the same apartment to wrap the rubble up for easier transport. While it would take a few trips, she still felt it was worth it. After almost an hour, the door to the apartment Becky and the others were in was covered in broken cement. While this might not guard against intelligent monsters, it would, or at least should, make other monsters not even want to deal with the rubble. With that now all set, Desiree headed back downstairs. When she reached the 1st floor, she adjusted her backpack and listened for any signs of monsters. Only when she felt the coast was clear did she crack the door open and look around. She slowly stepped out into the main hall and made her way towards the exit. But she only got halfway to the door when she stopped and saw something quite interesting. A second one got stuck. Desiree was shocked to see another large body flailing about in the entrance to the other stairwell. She never stopped to even look to see if another one had gotten stuck or not. When she had killed the first one, she took a deep breath and quickly but quietly made her way to the second monster and used appraisal on it. So Rancor for sure. Wait, is it different from the last one? She was slightly confused until something else caught her eye. Level 10? I guess it's prone to instant kill when the heart is dug out. But then I guess any living being would be the same, unless they did not have a heart. Desiree pondered for a moment, before closing her eyes and pumping herself up. I need to do this before it realizes there is a threat. Not wanting to give herself away or lose this chance. Desiree charged forward and jumped up into the air. She remembered roughly where she had attacked before to dig out the other Rancor's heart. With her claws fully extended, she slammed her right claw down and pierced through the Rancor's back. The Rancor roared out in pain, but was unable to do anything with how it was stuck. Desiree once more found her target, gripped the Rancor's heart, and pulled with all her might. A sickening, tearing sound was heard as the heart was pulled from its body. This time, though, Desiree was aware of the blood spray and quickly jumped back, getting out of the way. She tossed the crushed heart to the side and looked at the notification in front of her. You defeated a grey-back Rancor experience points gained. Level up. Heh. Desiree made a victory pose with two claws high above her head in a V shape. She was a little sad that she only got one level this time, but it was still better than nothing. Now then. Let's get 2 basic elemental attacks. Name, Desiree Harris Race, Ice Dragon Age, 14 level, 4 monster rank, AF evolution requirements, reach level 20, and kill 3 rank E elites HP, 200 MP, 95 skill points, 0 skills, 1 ice breath, but 1 iced immunity, L max, appraisal 1, first aid, L1 first outwound skin, L1 spark, 1 spark, 3 L1 cleanse, AL1 drink, VL1 1 IT, 1 iron dick, VL1 drink, 1 arrow 1. It seemed her health liked 1 FEL to jump 50 points per level, and her mana was a little all over the place on how it rose. But it was still about half of her health, which was good. The biggest thing was her 2 new skills. One was Ice Arrow. She chose this because she was an ice dragon, and it was faster to cast than her ice breath. The second spell was Fireball. She got this to have the opposite element that her main element. An ice dragon who had fire spells, she was quite proud of herself for her trickery. Luckily there was no incantation or anything like that. Everything was voice activation. But mana cost was something she now had to think about since Ice Arrow and Fireball both used 10 MP. She could get 5 casts of one spell and 4 of another, or 9 casts altogether of the same spell. She did not know if she could fire more than one at a time or not. This was something she would need to play around with to find out. For now, her main goal was 2 things. First, she needed to check her own house to see if her father had returned. If he had, good, she would need to figure out how to get him to notice it was her. The second thing came after that. If he was not home, she would need to head to Lower Manhattan. This was not going to be a quick trip. I should have said I might need to take another day. She knew just getting to her house would take a few hours if she was not lucky, and ended up needing to fight or run away from monsters. Then it would take her almost a half day, if not more, to get to the fire station that her father works out of, if he was even there. I am sure they will wait for me. Or at least Becky will. Taking a deep breath, Desiree walked out of the building.